waste any time telling him that the mission to destroy the relic had been a failure. Not only had it failed, but the relic wasn't a relic at all. It was a ship that was capable of moving on land. Panic immediately wanted to know its current status. Kim reported grimly that he had only managed to destroy a portion of it and the ship had managed to get away. Kim glanced at the enormous trail that led from the ground all the way to the sea. As incredible as it seemed, the ship had escaped into the ocean. On the other end of the line, Panic completely lost his cool. He let out a scream of disbelief at the shocking news before bitterly asking what the worst news was. Kim promptly explained that the ship was built in the year 2072. He described it as an aerial transport warship, equipped with machinery for producing clones. He added that it most likely belonged to the Wheel military. Panic was stunned for a second, but then he started laughing cheerfully, thinking this was actually a good thing. Kim, confused, asked him why. Panic was quick to explain his reasoning. The main danger with ancient relics, he said, was the sheer lack of information about them. But now that they knew where the ship came from and what it did, they could breathe a little easier. Panic added that it was a prototype clone box warship, which meant its appearance in this area made a lot of sense. Kim was completely floored by how much Panic knew. Panic didn't deny it, immediately explaining that the Over the Z plan was a Wheel initiative, and that he himself was a member of Wheel. Now, the Over the Z plan is a classic conspiracy theory, the kind of wild rumor you'd find spreading online. It centers on Wheel, who are known as the world's strongest superpower. The theory goes that Wheel, aiming to control other nations, funneled all its technology into developing weapons beyond anyone's imagination. The whole story was so outrageous that nobody actually believed it, but Panic told Kim that every word of it was true. However, before Kim could get the full story, his communication device suddenly fried and went dead. Just as he was trying to figure out what happened, the Royal Assassin appeared. The Royal Assassin showed up and explained that the device's operational time had simply expired. He then mentioned a nearby military base equipped with hologram communication gear they could use to get back in touch. Without even a word of thanks, Kim immediately asked the Royal Assassin why he was only showing up now. The assassin coolly replied that Kim had looked too dangerous before, which left Kim speechless. Later, at the Garkantine Kingdom's base in the Demon Territory, Kim and Panic were talking things over inside a tent. Kim wanted more details on the Over the Z plan, and Panic was quick to share what he knew. He explained that it was fairly straightforward since part of the plan was already underway. The clones, he said, were given only basic programming, and the whole thing was likely built with technology from 50 years in the future. Kim figured the crew of the Ace warship must know about the plan too. Panic disagreed, saying that even the personnel on board wouldn't know the full details. However, based on its design, the warship's primary objective was self-repair using an autonomous system to leverage its manufacturing capabilities. This system could produce not only clone soldiers, but also fighter jets and submarines. If it were to find mineral deposits underwater, things could get really bad. Kim seemed to grasp the severity of the situation. He then changed the subject, asking Panic about something called Legion cells. The question alone made Panic break out in a cold sweat. He began to explain. Back in March of 2022, the Georgia State Police were investigating a man living a double life. By all appearances, he was a quiet and honest family man, but in reality, he was the head of a notorious criminal organization. The police were baffled as to how he pulled it off, assuming he must have been using master-level disguise skills. His disguises were so advanced that they seemed to alter his very bone structure and facial features. Because of this, no one suspected that two different people were sharing the same body. That is, until someone managed to capture footage of the man in the middle of his transformation. The organization known as White Bell gave him the code name Doppelganger, and a massive manhunt was launched to bring him in. Soldiers surrounded his home and opened fire, tragically killing his wife and eldest son in the process. The only reason they were able to capture him was that White Bell promised to spare the life of his second son. It turned out the second son wasn't biologically related to the man, but they did discover a strange type of cell within the boy's body. These cells resembled a multitude of faces, which is why they were given the name Legion. Researchers found that if they were subjected to a specific external stimulus, the cells could perform what seemed like miracles by changing their own properties. Thanks to this discovery, the super soldier project that White Bell was running made a huge leap forward. With this major breakthrough, White Bell's next objective was to capture the original source of the Legion cells. But the moment they tried, all hell broke loose. After recounting the story, Panic finally got to the point for Kim. He told him that the cells in his body were these very same Legion cells. Kim, however, was skeptical. He reasoned that if White Bell was never able to capture the original entity, Panic clarifies that he was only referring to the second son's cells. He sweats and nods, assuring Kim that the boy himself is perfectly fine. In fact, he's being raised by the military, receiving monthly health checks, and living a relatively free life. Kim is silent for a moment, processing this. Still skeptical, Kim presses the issue. This time, however, Panic doesn't seem so sure of himself as Kim finishes his thought. He points out that when the incident happened, everyone involved met their maker. They certainly aren't living freely and well. Even though they inherited the genes, they possess none of the abilities. And even though he's a son, he's not of the same kind. Panic is left to ponder this, as Kim's reaction isn't what he anticipated. After all, he knows that family is incredibly important to Kim. In fact, it's the only anchor to his humanity. If Kim were to lose his family, his human side would vanish completely. Changing the subject, Panic brings up the ship. stating that they need to find it. The main challenge is locating the vessel in the vast E1C. Kim asks what High Panic has in mind, but unfortunately, he doesn't have a plan. With no satellites or radar available, he hopes Kim might have an idea, but his question is met with only a weary sigh. Kim, unwilling to reveal his methods, simply departs, promising to report back once he has some results to share. Watching him go, High Panic is at a loss for words, feeling like he's just made a fool of himself in front of Kim. Suddenly he breaks out in a cold sweat. He's struck by a sudden realization. If it weren't for Kim, he would have been devoured by monsters long ago. Meanwhile, at the port city of Surtak, Kim reverts from his dragon form back to human, making a swift landing. He then uses his ability detaching an arm and letting it drop into the ocean. The arm instantly disperses into countless tiny particles, attracting the local fish. He discovers that inside the tuna are the muscles of a dragon-scaled ox and the marrow of a buffalo. They should be called chimera fish, not tuna, Kim muses as he regenerates a new arm. He then repeats the process, dropping both of his arms into the sea. Once again, they quickly disperse in all directions. Kim then issues a command to the fish, now under his influence, ordering them to grow rapidly and search for a large metal object. With their eyes glowing red, the fish immediately obey. Too bored to just wait around for his scout fish to report back, Kim decides to do a little fishing himself. Just as Kim is contemplating changing his title to "The stronger I fish, the stronger I get," the royal assassin shows up, interrupting his thoughts. The royal assassin starts to ask about Kim's fishing, but stops short when he sees a pile of fish heads nearby, a look of disgust crossing his face. He wonders aloud how Kim can even think about cooking in such a place. Finally unable to stand the smell any longer, the royal assassin pinches his nose. Suspecting Kim might have eaten the whole pile of fish raw. Amidst the overwhelming fishy stench, Kim remains completely unfazed and asks the royal assassin what brings him here. The royal assassin is about to mention High Panic, but he gets distracted when his eyes fall upon the impressive fishing rod in Kim's hand. The royal assassin begins to circle Kim, unable to take his eyes off the rod. He recognizes it as the legendary Ocean Master 2000. He explains that 15 years ago, when the world was consumed with magic research, all the top fishing experts in Thew gathered together. They pooled their knowledge to bring out the latent power within the materials, creating a masterpiece, the Ocean Master 2000. To this day, while the theory of combining magic and technology has been applied in various fields, it's all still considered experimental. Nothing has ever come close to surpassing this very fishing rod. Kim listens to the royal assassin's long-winded explanation, unsure of how to reply. He had just picked it up recently, figuring it must have belonged to someone who is a little too obsessed with their hobby. Seeing how thrilled the royal assassin is, Kim casually hands the rod over to him. The royal assassin is in disbelief, clutching the fishing rod as if it were a priceless treasure. Changing the subject, Kim asks the royal assassin about High Panic. Still completely mesmerized by the fishing rod, the royal assassin answers Kim's question. His admiration for his new gift makes his answer a bit distracted, but after learning he needs to head to the temporary base, Kim quickly sprouts a pair of wings and takes to the sky. He leaves behind a stunned royal assassin who is still processing the fact that he now owns the legendary rod. A moment later, all other thoughts are forgotten as he happily sits down to fish. Meanwhile, when Kim arrives at the command tent in the base area, he finds High Panic already waiting for him. It's clear High Panic has something on his mind, but he starts by beating around the bush, saying that even though he's afraid of Kim, he also trusts him completely. He emphasizes that since they both come from Earth, they're comrades. He insists he isn't lying or hiding anything but before High Panic can finish his preamble, Kim cuts him off and tells him to get to the point. Left with no other choice, High Panic gets straight to business. First, he brings up the local fish catch, which has dropped sharply because of a strange new fish species. Apparently, they're so ferocious, they tear right through nets and even eat the hooks. High Panic wants to know if Kim is behind this. Kim thinks for a moment. He only commanded those fish to search for the ship. He didn't expect them to develop their own thoughts and behaviors. After a moment of consideration, Kim flatly denies any involvement. Just as High Panic is about to question him again, Kim adds another statement. It couldn't be me. The beings I summoned follow my orders to the letter. Hearing this, High Panic is now absolutely certain that it was Kim, but he decides not to press the issue. Instead, he moves on to his next question. Apparently, merfolk suddenly appeared on the shores of the Afaram Kingdom 2 days ago. However, these aren't the typical demon race merfolk. They're something else entirely. Because of them, the entire Afaram Kingdom went on high alert. Kim immediately denies any connection to this, insisting he was just fishing. High Panic takes note of his answer. This leads him to assume the incident must have been caused by that mysterious ship. He theorizes it created merman clones before it produced the warship. Their goal was to invade the mainland. Hearing this, Kim suggested they go meet the monsters since they needed them to find that ship. HPIC thanked Kim for stepping up and said he had one last question. He then asked about the royal assassin brothers who had suddenly requested paid leave because they now had 2,000 legendary ocean masters. HPIC's expression turned serious. He wanted to know if they belonged to Kim. This time, Kim couldn't deny it. He just fell silent, trying to both deny it and slip away at the same time. HPIC was furious at Kim's reaction and demanded he hand over the fishing rod. He reminded Kim that they were both people from Earth. and he was struggling to get by. Kim couldn't stand HPIC's whining, so he just picked at his ear, pretending not to care. Meanwhile, on the warship, the artificial intelligence that had seized control was now capable of learning and thinking on its own. It was partially damaged, leading to power failures and data loss, but the information it had on the demon race was still intact, and it was top-level intel. The warship had also gathered extensive data on the sea. The combination of these two datasets is what led to the creation of the merman clones. Over at the coast of the Aphorum Kingdom, hordes of these clones were swarming ashore and attacking the kingdom's naval soldiers. The soldiers were completely outmatched, getting taken down in just a few moves. The mermen were acting with brutal efficiency. They spared no one. Amidst the chaos, a little boy in a Navy uniform took a little girl's hand, trying to escape together. But as they were scrambling to get away, a merman suddenly appeared right behind them. Without hesitating, the boy raised his gun to shoot the merman. The moment seemed to freeze as he squeezed his eyes shut, pulled the trigger, and braced himself. But nothing happened. When the boy opened his eyes, he saw Kim standing there shielding him. Kim even asked if the boy belonged to the 3rd Squad of the Aphorum Kingdom's naval forces. Meanwhile, in Anku Fel, the capital of the Anlop-Bam Kingdom, a carriage pulled up right to the front door. HPIC stepped out of the carriage with an air of importance. He called out a greeting to his uncle, who turned out to be none other than King Dan Anlop-Bam himself. But the moment the king saw his nephew, he bluntly told him to shut up. Hearing this, the young man feigned being hurt, pointing out that the king was scolding him the second they met. Unfazed by this act, the king nonchalantly replied that it was as bland as dishwater. He appeared calm on the surface, but inside he was on edge, wondering what kind of scheme a cunning brat like HPC was plotting now. He couldn't help but wonder how the sweet, angelic kid he once knew had turned into such a cunning little demon. Getting tired of the silence, King Dan demanded to know what on earth HPIC was doing there this time. Was he planning to drag him down with those toys he brought last time, or was he trying to sell him that ship he'd shown him before? He added that his kingdom had been incredibly busy lately, all because his naval squadron number 5 had been attacked by merfolk. Hearing this, HPIC said that was exactly what he'd come to talk about and that he could help. The king was skeptical, pointing out that by the time his reinforcements had arrived, all of his sailors were already dead. Besides, he asked, wasn't the number of private space mages he'd sent so far a little too small? HPIC calmly prodded the king, asking if he really thought he could handle this with just that many men. The king wasn't angered by the question. Instead, he shot back, "What are you going to summon, a dragon or something?" A mysterious smile played on HPIC's lips as he confirmed, "As a matter of fact, I've already sent one." Just as he said that, a massive shadow fell over them. King Dan looked up and his jaw dropped. He could hardly believe his eyes. It turned out that what he was seeing was a giant red dragon with 2 people riding on its back. A moment later, a haggard face with deep, dark circles under its eyes appeared. It was HPIC complaining that he'd stayed up all night planning countermeasures. But there was one thing that bothered him. He wondered why, despite never seeing Kim sleep, the guy always looked as sharp as a tack. Kim calmly replied that he did sleep. "So when do you sleep?" HPIC asked. After a moment of silence, Kim said that he slept just like a dolphin. The statement horrified HPIC, who asked if his 2 brains actually took turns sleeping. Instead of answering, Kim just muttered to himself that, more accurately, his primary and secondary brains took turns resting. Inwardly, HPIC was cursing him for being a total monster, but outwardly he just asked with concern if he was really okay, since today he had the most important role to play. Kim was quiet for a moment, then asked if HPIC was just messing with him, since he'd gotten so used to treating him like a subordinate. Right, HPIC didn't answer, instead asking a question of his own. "Isn't your goal to become the ultimate being? Your return to Earth is just a step along the way?" Right, he was about to ramble on when Kim cut him off, calling him a fool. He said his question was meaningless and explained that reaching the peak isn't defined by then using the same power that could turn his hand into a dragon's claw. He clapped the boy on the shoulder and continued, "The pinnacle isn't about getting recognition from others. The true pinnacle is being able to adapt and survive no matter how your environment, adapt to any changes without a single problem. Whether it's a place with no light, a freezing wasteland with no warmth, a barren desert without a drop of water, or even in the vacuum of space where there's no oxygen, a person could still survive. That's what you'd call the pinnacle." Kim felt that just fitting into human society was just the bare minimum. Right on cue, Dan walked in. The moment he saw him, HPIC announced that an international conference was scheduled to start at noon today. His words left Dan completely stunned. HPIC calmly added that most of the high-ranking nations would be attending the conference. He then casually asked Dan if he was ready for it. This nonchalant attitude caught Dan off guard, and he asked HPIC why he was only hearing about this now. HPIC explained that if he'd told him sooner, Dan would have probably planned to ask for aid at the conference. Dan had to admit it was true. But HPIC shot that down, saying it was a terrible idea. Instead of asking for a handout, he should frame it as a request for cooperation from the other nations. Unlike on Earth, the power ceiling for an individual on the continent of EL1 is way higher. The security measures here just can't keep up with that kind of power. That's why it's so rare for all the leaders to gather in one place. Because of this, the M1 Continents International Conference is organized through the Church of the Goddess. The whole thing is conducted using special communication devices provided by the church to each nation. At that very moment, inside the ANQPH Grand Temple, Dan and HPIC were meeting with the other kings through a communication orb, while Kim was just chilling in a corner. A representative announced, "The international conference will now begin in Atiawasar," and then asked to speak first. But HPIC shamelessly cut in, pointing out that the Gankontine Kingdom was currently hogging all the massive profits from the Demon Tribe's territory. The king, who got interrupted, snapped back that he had an urgent matter to report immediately. The boy casually shot back, "What could possibly be so urgent?" The king then continued, "Since last week, our fish catch has started to drop dramatically, and it's not just in one area, it's happening in every sea across the continent. At the same time, strange merfolk have also been spotted off the coast of the Anbap Lam Kingdom." Hearing this, Dan anxiously chimed in, asking if any of the kings here had received a request for help from his kingdom. One of the kings bluntly stated that as far as he could tell, no one had sent any help. He even chuckled, saying he was aware that the fish catch was down, but figured it was just a temporary problem. Then he taunted, "Doesn't the Anbap Lam Kingdom have the strongest navy in the world?" Dan swallowed his pride and argued that sending reinforcements would be like just adding a few more bodies to the pile for no reason. Another king spoke up, asking, "Isn't this issue supposed to be about the Demon King?" At this point, HPC jumped in, confirming that this incident was in fact related to the Demon King. The moment he said that, everyone was stunned. The bewildered kings all asked if this was really connected to the Demon King. Someone even demanded to know if he had a witness or any proof. HPIC calmly replied that he did, and called over Kim, who was standing casually in the corner. Kim quickly walked over and stepped into the king's communication circle. He then, acting in his capacity as an honorary priest of the Holy Sword Order, swore an oath to the goddess that everything he was about to say was the absolute truth with no deception. Suddenly, a halo of light appeared around him. This is known as the Declaration of Truth, one of the miracles granted by a transcendent being like a god. The person making the Declaration of Truth becomes enveloped in light. This light is the goddess's way of guaranteeing that every word the speaker says is the truth. If the person making the declaration tells a single lie, they will be struck down by the goddess. While standing inside the range of this light, all of their skills are nullified. However, no one can attack the person making the declaration either. Kim was now affirming that everything HPIC had just said was true. He stated that the reason for the steep drop in the fish catch was because of the merfolk. He explained that he'd seen it with his own two eyes and confirmed the matter was related to the Demon King. What's more, he'd also seen that these merfolk had a very strange appearance. He believed their very existence went against the will of the gods. He also shared that he had infiltrated their main base and had seen everything for himself. As Kim was speaking, HPIC watched the halo of truth nervously. As the halo wavered, HPIC trembled right along with it. Meanwhile, Kim was still confidently explaining that the merfolk's existence shared a common origin with the Demon King. Despite HPIC's fear, the halo of truth kept shining steadily around Kim. After a moment, the light began to fade away, and he was completely unharmed. He then opened his eyes, revealing a sharp, hidden aura. Kim's expression turned serious, as he declared with absolute certainty, "I'm the one who saw those merfolk with my own two eyes, and there's one thing I'm even more sure of. That's right, they are definitely connected to the Demon King. The fish I created were meant for subjugating the Demon King, so of course they have nothing to do with any of this." With that thought, he returned to his usual calm demeanor, closing his eyes. He closed his eyes and kept speaking to the bizarrely shaped mermen, telling them that their very existence clearly went against the wishes of the gods. Seeing him lie so smoothly made High Panic a little uneasy. He thought to himself that the mermen were creatures modeled after mythology, and since the goddess had said it wasn't their time to appear. Yet, what Kim was saying seemed plausible. At this point, Kim added that he had infiltrated their base and had seen with his own two eyes that their existence originated from the same source as the Demon King. As far as he knew, their base was the At aircraft carrier, and what's more, both Demon Kings were from Earth. This suggested that the mermen also came from Earth. As he spoke, the people in the meeting fell completely silent. The way he saw it, one could guess that these monsters were created before the Demon King's death and were meant to attack humanity. Just then, one of the kings in the meeting suddenly spoke up. He began to break out in a cold sweat, bowing his head. If this was actually true, then an alliance was unavoidable. And in that case, who would lead it? High Panic then spoke up. In his view, the Ambuplam Kingdom was the best choice. He reasoned that although it was the kingdom that had suffered the greatest losses, its navy was still the strongest, and also the main party involved in this incident. Hearing High Panic out, the group agreed he had a point and went along with his opinion. At that moment, Joden finally said something expressing his hope that everyone would accept the proposal. Joden had now gotten what he wanted. Back up. However, he shot High Panic a very suspicious look. He had no idea what kind of scheme the man was cooking up. High Panic's face was still all smiles, but inwardly he was overjoyed. Everything was going according to plan. The Allied forces had now been officially formed. The Atship was now adrift on the water. It was supposed to be looking for mineral deposits, but it had attacked the Anbu Kingdom instead. The mermen simply came ashore and attacked the humans. This group figured that instead of searching for underwater minerals, plundering refined ones was more efficient. Besides, to them, these bothersome creatures weren't a problem at all. These mermen were extremely aggressive, attacking humans on sight. However, because they were much weaker than the clone army, simply getting rid of them was easy enough. Suddenly, a huge red dragon-like creature showed up. It wiped out the entire clone army. The military ship wanting to control this creature built a fleet of fighter jets. 6 months later, he was sitting in the snowy wind. He shut his eyes tightly as if he was searching for something. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open. At the bottom of the sea were schools of fish, and among them, a ship. Found it. In the territorial waters of the Anbu Kingdom, a large vessel was sailing through the snowy wind. High Panic approached the Grand Admiral at the helm, reminding him that it was time. On continent E1, the supreme commander of the Allied forces was Grand Admiral Asman. Hearing High Panic, he simply gave a short reply, "I know." In contrast, to his usual calm, he now looked more tense because he knew they were about to attack the Mermen's base and those monsters. The Grand Admiral immediately ordered 2 ships to scout out the situation. The Allied forces had received a lot of help in many ways from the Jiankontin Kingdom. The ship had now dived into the sea, and the top of each vessel was armed with weapons that packed a serious punch. Suddenly he thought of Kim's terrifying face with his blazing eyes, and he shuddered. It wasn't just weapons they had, but also monsters. As he steered the ship, he thought that without the use of new technology and Kim's help, the Anbu Kingdom might have been wiped out a long time ago. You could say he was prone to anxiety because from start to finish, he was always overthinking things. Right now, he couldn't believe that in just 6 months, they could advance their technology to this level. To him, Prince Edward also seemed very suspicious. At that moment, someone suddenly shouted loudly, telling the Admiral that the scout ship had returned. The ship was back in a surprisingly short amount of time. However, when he saw the vessel, he was so shocked that his cigarette dropped from his mouth. The reason was that the ship was now flying a red flag signaling an emergency. After hearing the Admiral's command, a swarm of planes shot forward like a storm. Suddenly, while they were in the air, a massive explosion went off. A giant purple monster with countless tentacles appeared. It furiously attacked all the planes heading its way. A naval soldier at that moment was holding an orb that contained an image of the monster. He stammered, saying this was the strange image they recorded at the time. This caused everyone there to break out in a cold sweat. How could this be? The naval soldier yelled at the 2 of them, telling the Admiral they had to retreat. The Admiral was taken aback by his subordinate's words, claiming that on the contrary, this was a golden opportunity. Suddenly, a dragon soared past them, landing gracefully on the ship's railing. It was Kim. The Admiral couldn't help but wonder why he'd transformed. Then in a flash, he vanished without a trace. The Admiral found it difficult to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. He turned to confront the prince, demanding to know if he understood the gravity of the situation and why Kim was allowed to act so recklessly. In response to his outburst, the prince simply replied with a calm demeanor that he was well aware. He admitted, however, that even he couldn't quite explain what that octopus-like monster truly was. He then smirked. "This is exactly why I brought Kim along. At this point, we have no choice but to trust in Kim." Flashing back a little to when everyone was observing the monster through the orb, H-Pan had realized the octopus was actually a part of Kim's body. It was true, but a few complications had just cropped up. Hearing this, H-Pan asked, "Don't tell me that your body is reassembling itself." Kim quickly corrected him. "Not exactly. In fact, a part of my body is malfunctioning and I've lost control of that octopus." H-Pan was stunned to hear this. Kim continued nonchalantly, "If this keeps up, the entire plan will fall apart. Still, at the very least, the enemy battleship might get sunk by it. Or on the flip side, its target might be our own fleet." Hearing that H-Pan started to panic. Their target was supposed to be weak enough for the Allied forces to handle alone. Noticing his companion's concern, Kim quickly reassured him, "Don't worry, I'll handle this myself right now." He had already transformed and was taking flight, hovering in the sky. He realized that the moment the parts of his body gathered in one place, the flow of information had been cut off. He reconsidered. It wasn't so much blocked as it was completely disconnected. Could it be, he wondered, looking down at the scene below? It was absolute chaos. Battleships, planes, and the monster were locked in a fierce battle. Could this be the age of chaos? The monster's tentacles were relentlessly lashing out at the planes, and every so often one would get hit and immediately explode. One fighter jet shot forward like a bullet, heading straight for the monster before dropping a bomb right on. the base of its tentacle. The bomb detonated on impact, catching the monster's attention. As the smoke cleared, the part of the tentacle looked like it had been seared with a massive crater blown into it. But somehow, it began to regenerate at an incredible speed, returning to its original state. Kim was stunned by this display, unable to believe how well they were holding their own. At this rate, wasn't his rogue part going to self-destruct? Realizing the situation was looking dire, he began to accelerate, diving straight down from the sky. Suddenly, the system announced the detection of a Z-like life form. The monster also sensed that something was wrong and let out a low growl. Just then, he charged towards the monster in a blur of motion. Another massive explosion erupted, sending smoke and fire billowing into the sky. He emerged from the smoke cloud in his human form, though still sporting wings. As he landed safely, the battleship's system announced once again, unidentified life form confirmed. Unauthorized approach. Countermeasures unavailable. He tried to calm the system, saying, "Relax, I'm here to make a deal. No need to be on guard. I've come to help you." In response, the spherical drones flying around him formed a circle, aiming their weapons and announcing, "Request denied. Please vacate the battleship immediately." Kim replied patiently, "I'm a representative of SD Monterey from WV. Upon receiving this information, the drones beeped as they searched their database for the name SD Monterey. The system found a match. An agent belonging to WV reported missing during a mission to capture Jiden Passhop. Opening communication under special protocol. Time. Limit is 180 seconds. Just then, the spherical monster with a single large eye and numerous tentacles appeared behind Kim. Fighter planes were still circling above it. Kim pointed at the creature and said, "Let's cooperate to take that thing down first. We can talk after." The system confirmed, temporarily registering Jaden Original. Switching system to Sea Monster Extermination mode. "See, we're on the same page," Kim praised. "And if those planes get in our way, feel free to clean them up too." With that, Kim leaped into the sky, spreading his wings and transforming back into his monster form. The other creature glared up, snarled, and roared, "Die!" It thrust its tentacles directly at Kim, but he nimbly dodged the massive appendages. He carefully observed its movements and then made a decisive slash, severing a tentacle clean off. Immediately after, he opened his maw and unleashed a powerful stream of fire piercing straight through another one of its tentacles. The severed parts of the monster's body fell away behind Kim, only to reconnect into a single pulsing mass of flesh. From that mass, countless fish-like mouths filled with razor-sharp teeth began to emerge, and somewhere someone else was watching this very battle unfold. On a phone, the school of fish behind Kim lunged to attack him, but he easily swatted them away with his tail without even bothering to turn his head to look. And that simple motion was enough to make the mass of monster flesh dissolve and fall away. He asked the monster, "Is that all you've got? Is that all you can handle? You must be exhausted after fighting off that airstrike. Before we talk, I'm going to make you a little more obedient." After saying that, he transformed his hands into two dragon heads. From the dragon's mouths, two intense flames began to swell. He aimed his hands directly at the monster, firing a stream of fire right into its eye. In an instant, the monster was engulfed in flames. When the fire subsided, pieces of the monster's body rained down upon the water's surface. Behind the thick smoke, only a part of the monster's eye remained. Kim asked it, "Tell me, how did you break free from my control?" The monster's eye widened with annoyance and shot back at Kim. "You should ask your own conscience that question, you jerk." It mocked, "Lord Kim, please. You accepted that title and started acting like a human. Tsk, how pathetic." Hearing its words, Kim's face fell and he broke into a cold sweat, unable to say a word. Meanwhile, the monster continued, "You've lost your way. Your goal was to stand at the pinnacle of all living beings, and that's also my goal." The monster, which came from Kim's own severed arm, then declared, "Just as you created me, you remind me of those sickening humans who act as a group, not as individuals." Kim quietly admitted, "What you're saying is true. I'll take some time to reflect." The monster seemed enraged and shouted, "Reflect? You think just saying that is enough? Up until now, everything you've done has been complete nonsense." Kim thought to himself, "A moment ago, I just thought it was a tool that had malfunctioned, but that's not it at all. This thing is an enemy I have to destroy." Seeing Kim's thoughtful expression, the monster laughed with glee. "Your face looks much better now." Don't you think it continued to taunt Kim? "That's right, this is how it should be. Anything that gets in your way must be killed and completely devoured. That is the real you." At this point, Kim had heard enough. From his dragon hands, he shot a massive flame straight at the monster. The monster's final defiant words were, "Even if you wear a human face, a monster is still a monster." After the attack, Kim wondered, can this be considered self-reflection? He turned away as the monster was reduced to fragments floating on the surface of the water. "Thanks to you, I've found myself again," Kim said as he transformed back into his human form. He and Prince High Panic returned to the robots. They scanned the prince's body and confirmed. The individual SWWG is confirmed as SDMOT. Therefore, control and command of the warship now belong to SDMOT, the soul. Identified United States citizen. Once the robots finished their scan, Prince High Panic asked, "Is that all it takes to settle this?" The prince said with a smirk, "If so, then we should take everything we need." With With that settled, the two of them returned to their boat, speeding across the open sea. Prince High Panic stood gazing at the water and said to Kim, "A lot of things this time have led to some completely unexpected results. The other races used humanity's encroachment on demon territory as an excuse to stay out of the war. However, since humanity ended the war, they've become stronger and more confident." The prince recalled his warriors in the basement and continued, "Furthermore, we now have the battleship. We secretly brought along cloning machines and other sophisticated equipment that can produce those materials almost indefinitely." After that, the prince turned and asked Kim, "How about we move the plan ahead of schedule?" Kim thought it was a good idea. Suddenly, the prince seemed a bit startled and asked, "Hey, have you figured out why that separated part of your body lost control? If there's no issue, we could use them to increase our Navy's combat power." This time, Kim disagreed. He said, "I'm not doing that again." Prince High Panic wondered, "Why, it's a shame to pass up such a powerful resource. With that, my preparations would be all but complete." Kim thought about the innocent people whose lives the monster had ruthlessly taken and said, "As you know, after experiencing a certain special event, X's destructive behavior can become extremely radical." Prince High Panic broke into a sweat and said, "I'm in charge of that, so I know, but what's your point?" Kim's voice suddenly turned bone-chilling. He warned, "When you cross the line, there's a price to pay, and it's a steep one." The prince was startled and asked with curiosity, "I wonder if what I'm asking is on the same level as that event." Kim's answer was no. Hearing that, the prince breathed a sigh of relief, patting his chest. But right after Kim said it was much worse than that, leaving the prince confused. Kim thought to himself, "Back then, even if I gave up my human side, my monster side would still exist. However, now I only have my monster side left." The prince changed the subject. "Oh, right. The coronation ceremony is next week, so I'll give you a general idea. Outline of the plan." The prince, realizing he'd overstepped, quickly changed the subject. For the time being, the prince had no desire to die. At the square, on High Panic's coronation day, a massive crowd had gathered, including a bard named Felina. She was also currently a reporter for the one daily newspaper. Afraid that meeting him would only lead to more misfortune, she decided to slip away before High Panic ascended the high platform to receive the crown. The one presenting it was an elderly man from the Holy See who placed the crown upon his head and declared that this country had a new king. Kim struck his sword on the ground with a loud clang, then raised his hand to the roaring cheers of the crowd. He proudly soaked in his coronation day. Felina was stunned, her jaw hanging open as she stared at him, a terrible feeling washing over her. She immediately fled the scene, certain that something was deeply wrong. Just as that thought crossed her mind, boom, a massive explosion ripped through the air behind her. Terrified, Felina whipped her head around to look. An explosion of unknown origin had just rocked the coronation ceremony, killing numerous nobles and high-ranking officials, while the newly crowned King H-Pick fell into a coma from the blast. The person put in charge of Jidan Kantin's state affairs was none other than Kim. He had by some miracle survived the tragedy and was hailed as the hero who pulled the kingdom back from the brink of collapse. Felina recorded everything she had just witnessed for a newspaper article. 3 months prior, a mysterious cloaked figure had appeared out of nowhere. 2 guards were bewildered, wondering who would be so bold as to barge in like that. One of them on edge cast a spell to stop the intruder, who was then encircled by a magic circle but showed no signs of fear. The soldier announced this was a diplomat's residence and demanded to know their purpose for being there. That mysterious person was, of course, Kim. The moment they got a clear look at him, their resolve to fight vanished. The other guard politely asked why he had come so late at night, only to have Kim lop his head off on the spot. The remaining guard trembled, too terrified to even make a sound. "Sir Kim, what are you doing?" A monstrous hand then reached for the other unfortunate soul. Fresh blood splattered everywhere. Kim strode majestically into the building, leaving 2 fresh corpses in his wake. In the capital of the Jidan Kantan Kingdom, South, Mirth stood the embassy of the Elphasis Elf Kingdom. Just moments ago, this mansion had been magnificent, but a few seconds later, it was a smoldering ruin. Kim coldly gazed down at the injured Alimi sitting on the ground. She was a diplomat and the Duchess of the Elphasis Kingdom. She was living in the Jidan Kantan Kingdom under the guise of a diplomat, but in truth, she was operating as a duchess. She was panicking because she was the one who had set off the bomb at H-Panic's inauguration. Even though she didn't manage to kill him, she was sure she hadn't left any evidence. She wondered how Kim could have possibly found her. He, on the other hand, was quite pleased his intuition had been so accurate. He simply repeated H-Panic's words. "If there's anyone more fitting to rule than me, it's those elves, and I'll be the first to tear them to shreds." Alimi was shocked, assuming H-Panic had woken up. But Kim's reply sent a chill down her spine. "Oh, he was never hurt. The only one who got played here was you." Alimi couldn't believe her ears. In the end, her entire plan had been for nothing. Kim had no patience for chit-chat and moved in to finish her off. Frightened, she hoped that Elphasis would find out what happened. "I have to do whatever it takes to create an opening," she thought, secretly casting a spell with her hand. Kim summoned a massive flame as if to incinerate everything in his path. Her body was consumed by the very magic she tried to weave. Kim thought to himself, "All right, time to bring back the first head." Elsewhere, the people cheered wildly to see that HPS had awakened. He was wrapped in bandages from head to toe and declared that the elves' conspiracy was thwarted. However, he claimed only one traitor was eliminated, and if they wanted true peace, every last elf out there must be punished to ensure a safe and secure society. This was followed by the enthusiastic cheers of the people. Kim had to compliment Hispanic on his shameless knack for lying. Hispanic just smirked and replied, "You have to put on a little show for the people." His goal was to seize both power and authority, and now everything was in place. Lesuth, however, was angrily questioning Panic's actions. This man was the current king of Ephesus, Jos Ephesus, and also the brother of the recently deceased Elimi. He continued to demand answers for the destruction of the embassy and the murder of its staff, all based on accusations without a shred of evidence. Panic casually scratched his ear, criticizing Lesuth for making such a fuss. Lesuth couldn't believe he was being ignored. It was then that Panic started to reveal his true colors. When a kingdom becomes an empire, the king becomes an emperor. You didn't know that. And what's this about an accusation? Without evidence. Did you really think I didn't know what you were plotting behind my back? Lesuth was furious, on the verge of exploding. You're completely insane, Elimi. No, what happened to our kingdom's diplomat? Panic pretended to think for a moment, before answering nonchalantly, "I was going to clean up the corpse, but it was honestly too disgusting, so I just left it. It's a shame you can't see it for yourself." That sentence was like a dagger in Lesuth's heart. Enraged, he growled through clenched teeth, "You inferior species. How dare you? You will absolutely pay the price for this." Panic was still in a joking mood, paying no mind to the other king's fury. You came here to pay the price for meddling with the human kingdom. Too bad your sister already paid that debt with her life. What a shame." Lesuth suddenly roared, "This is war. I hereby declare war on you inferior insects." All of Lesuth's pent-up anger had finally been unleashed. His face split into two completely opposite extremes. One side was the picture of pure fury, while the other was a mask of ice-cold calm. Just like that, the two most extreme emotions appeared on his face at the same time. Lesuth could not accept being humiliated by a so-called inferior human. He turned and declared to his subjects, "We will not retreat until we hold the head of that vile human emperor in our very hands." He raises the scepter high and a magic circle materializes. Lesuth's pupils then transform into purple clock faces. This is his time attribute magic, a power that grants the user visions of a future that is destined for the user. Predictions made with time attribute magic are absolute and unchangeable. In his vision, Lesuth sees the entire fortress consumed by a sea of flames. A satisfied smile spreads across his face. Lesuth smirks, raising his arm to the sky and declaring the future is set in stone. The Little Fitz tribe will be victorious. Meanwhile, Panic casually rests his chin in his hand, waiting with Kim for their anticipated guest. Kim can't figure out why Panic is so confident that a king like Lesuth would personally join the battle. Panic casually explains, "You killed the king's sister. To the Lufitz royal family, she was exceptionally important. The Lufitz tribe often practices in-family marriage to preserve the purity of the royal bloodline. Because of this, Elim was both the king's sister and his wife." Kim has heard enough. He's completely disgusted. Panic, however, is eagerly anticipating Lesuth's arrival to take his head, and at the same time try out the new ability he just acquired. But before that fight, he also plans on dealing with the group of dwarves. For them, what's coming isn't a war, but an absolute catastrophe. At that very moment, Lesuth is leading his soldiers toward Panic's location. In only 30 minutes, they'll reach the humans' base. Lesuth looks out at the people ahead. The moment they see him, they all turn and run, having no will to protect their capital. Seeing this, Lesuth frowns. He figures they must have gathered all their forces in the capital to face him. With that thought, he spurs his horse onward. The prophecy makes him feel more confident than ever. However, Lesuth's guess is only half right. In the blink of an eye, they arrive before the capital of the giant continent. Lesuth arrogantly calls for Panic to come out and pay for his crimes. He brazenly declares that if Panic refuses to show himself, he will turn the entire city into a sea of flames. Following his threat, something does appear, but the thing that materializes leaves Lesuth utterly terrified. Meanwhile, back in his room, Panic is still calmly snacking on delicious cookies. He takes a bite of a cookie and asks him, "You can't use magic, right?" Of course the answer is wrong. Kim can use magic perfectly well as he has accumulated magical knowledge by consuming it. Panic becomes more curious as they talk. He's never actually seen Kim use magic. In response, Kim raises his right hand and his sharp fingertips begin to glow a fiery blood-red color. Kim explains he's never had to use magic simply because he's already powerful enough. Besides, casting spells takes time, and being interrupted mid-cast is extremely dangerous. On the other hand, using his absorbed abilities is far easier. Kim knows his absorbed abilities are also compatible with magic, making casting spells not strictly necessary. But no matter what, Panic still wants to see it just once. He thinks having magic makes everything feel like a video game. However, Kim doesn't see it that way. In games, everyone starts out using magic, but the really strong characters always end up being warriors or stealth archers. Returning to the scene outside Santo Castle, the creature that appeared before the Elfits tribe is a giant three-headed dragon. The colossal dragon ignores Lesuth and charges directly into the army behind him. It leaps into the midst of the Elfits and starts wreaking havoc. Its three heads strike downwards, piercing the small tribesman. A lifeless Elfit soldier is crushed beneath its foot. This time, things are different. Its arms have become heads. It's using newly acquired wyvern wings, 4 hands, and its tail belongs to a dinosaur. Seeing this monstrosity, the Lufit soldiers are scared out of their minds. Before they can even react, the dragon attacks with its tail. A single spin of its massive body sends them flying high into the air. Witnessing this, Lesuth is also terrified, having no idea what is even happening. The Elfit, staring at this bizarre, stitched-together creature, can't decide if it's a dragon or something else entirely. The 2 dragon heads on its sides slowly open their mouths, preparing for another attack. Unfortunately for them, Lesuth has already figured out its plan. He commands his soldiers to raise their fire shields to block the incoming attack. The circle of troops surrounding the dragon suddenly glows red from the magical shields, but that doesn't deter the beast. It opens its mouths and a torrent of power erupts. Like a violent storm, the attack blasts through thousands of layers of fire shields, incinerating the Elfit soldiers. Seeing their defenses fail, the Elfits are left completely defenseless. Every soldier is hit by the dragon's poison. Their flesh immediately begins to burn violently before melting away like water. That last attack was a spray of concentrated, highly acidic liquid. It wasn't just the fire shields. Any kind of equipment would be eaten right through. The dragon head in the center speaks again with arrogance. This time it's a real fireball breath. Try to block this. With that, it unleashes a torrent of flame at the Elfits. Lesuth is in disbelief. Could the flame from the prophecy actually be not their flame of victory, but this? This scene is exactly the one from his prophecy. However, in reality, his soldiers are being burned alive. He looks up at the city wall just ahead of him, as if Hypanic's expression in the prophecy wasn't one of fear towards Elpis. To be precise, it was an expression of utter hatred. Extreme hatred, a curse. Lesuth felt ridiculous. The vision he saw of the future was real, and the outcome of the battle was a figment of his imagination. Lesuth lost control and burst into crazed laughter. He gripped his scepter, a fool-like. He brought this upon myself. I have to clean this mess up myself. Then he leaped off his horse. Lesuth flew straight above the dragon's head, preparing to attack it from above. Many magic circles were summoned overhead. Would that magical fuel be enough to defeat the defiant dragon? Lesuth, holding his scepter, leaped high into the air. He cast countless magic circles, then rushed towards Kim. Lesuth looked down at Kim, who was struggling below, and created even more magic circles. He raised his scepter and said, "Slow time." The spell took effect on Kim's tail. Lesuth said it was a slowing magic. Time stacked 7 layers deep. If so, while time is frozen, you won't be able to move. Before he could finish speaking, the tail slammed into Lesuth. He was pinned to the ground by the tail. Lesuth coughed up blood and whispered weakly, "How is that skill possible?" Kim glanced at him with a look of regret and said, "You can't overcome my skill. What a pity." On the city wall, a soldier said to Hypanic, "Your Majesty, look, we've won. It's magnificent. With just Sir Kim, we can rule this world." Hypanic replied, "Impossible. He doesn't serve me. He does everything only because of the contract. If the contract isn't upheld..." Hypanic's face turned pale, thinking that the 3-headed dragon Kim would destroy his kingdom. He continued, "Then the claws of that monster will be turned on us." Suddenly, a massive explosion occurred, and flames engulfed the battlefield below. Meanwhile, the elf Prince Duyun was sitting in his room. The prince's life was a series of failures, always being compared to his 2 younger brothers. But the prince was still leisurely enjoying tea. His greatest achievement in life was slaying a hydra, a 3-headed serpent monster. But compared to his younger brother Duyun, capturing a dragon, it was nothing worth mentioning. Prince Lesuth had even defeated a great dragon. Nevertheless, slaying the hydra was still considered an achievement. Finally, Duyun had accepted his reality. Thus, he calmly enjoyed his tea. His current position was policy advisor. As the name suggests, this position was to offer advice on the kingdom's policies. Duyun put his teacup down on the table. He opened the door and went outside. "We all know that my younger brother, who can see the future Lesuth, needs a policy advisor. It's just a position in name only." Duyun went outside and said, "It's truly peaceful." He clenched his fist, thinking, "Letting go of my obsession with the royal family has made my heart feel so much lighter. This must be what people call being free from worldly desires. This kind of life has its own meaning." Suddenly, soldiers shouted, "Lord Duyun." They ran over and knelt before him. Duyun asked the soldiers, "What happened?" One of them said, "Your Highness Lesuth has fallen in the battle against the humans." Duyun, terrified, said, "Lesuth is dead." The soldier recalled his fallen comrades and said, "Yes, that's right. Not only that, but all 20,000 soldiers who went into battle with him have been wiped out." Duyun thought the Gaizian Khanten kingdom couldn't possibly have such a strong military force. But then he remembered. Kim. If that's the case, could it be... Someone stepped forward and said, because His Highness Lesuth passed away at such a young age and he had no children to inherit the throne, nor did he appoint a successor. That person holding the crown continued, and currently among the surviving high elves, the one with the purest bloodline is Your Highness Duyun. He broke out in a cold sweat, staring at the crown before him. Duyun hesitated. Meanwhile, Hypanic was sitting in his room whistling. Kim pushed the door open, forcefully startling him. Hypanic said, "You're... Here, how are you becoming more and more like a monster?" Hypanic thought of Kim's three-headed dragon form. "Those nobles over there have sent letters of surrender." Kim sat down and replied, "Is that so?" Hypanic handed him a piece of paper and said, "Yes, but this is one of the conditions for surrender." Kim picked up the paper and saw written on it, "The Guardian of the Gaizian. Content Kingdom will be present at the signing of the surrender document." Hypanic asked, "If it's all right, will you come with me?" In the kingdom of Elpis, a castle was situated at the foot of a giant tree. In front of the castle stood an army, clad in armor. Inside the reception room, Kim was sitting with Hypanic and Duyun. Duyun slammed his glass on the table and said, "Sir Kim, admitting my own weakness has made my heart feel much lighter." He placed a hand on his chest as he spoke. "From now on, I've decided I will no longer depend on my own bloodline, but will instead seek my own strength. However it is, that very bloodline that has brought me the throne." He said this while looking at the crown on the table. Hypanic thought to himself, "What's with this guy? Is he drunk? This guy is the king of the elves." Hypanic took a sip of his drink and thought, "I was wondering why he called that monster here too. Turns out he's just going through a phase." Hypanic said, I understand. I'm the same. My brother is an exceptional person." "I understand. Completely." Duyun asked, "Are you in a similar situation as me?" Hypanic replied, "That's right. As you said, you want to achieve your own strength, but it seems the situation around you isn't very favorable." Duyun nodded and said, "That's right." Kim, eating while observing. Panic remarked, "But at the end of the day, your bloodline kept you from inheriting the power that could truly change this kingdom, didn't it?" Dudan's eyes widened as if waking from a dream. Panic pressed on, saying, "This means you have the chance to remake the kingdom's entire system, shifting it from one based on bloodline to one based on pure strength." Dudan placed his hand firmly on the table and said, "But if we make such a drastic change, I'm worried it could cause a huge uproar." Panic simply said, "Elpis and Lesuth are gone. So tell me who is the strongest mage in the kingdom now." Dudan was silent for a moment, deep in thought. Panic added, "If anyone causes trouble, you just use your power to put them down. Use your own power." Those words seemed to flip a switch in Dudan's mind. He clenched his fist, and his hand began to glow with magical energy. Dudan whispered, "My power." Panic watched him and thought, a king wouldn't normally fall for such sweet talk so easily, but the moment he drank that wine, this was a done deal. "That's because I slipped some enchiquai into his glass a little, something that messes with the nervous system. All it took was a tiny pinch." The trigger phrase was, "your own power." Panic remembered telling Dudan to use his own power. At that very moment, a twisted smile had spread across Dudan's face. He had whispered, "My power. I can finally use my power." The very next day, Dudan sat on the throne and addressed his ministers. "Everyone listen carefully. I have concluded our negotiations with the Zhejian Kantine Kingdom. The outcome of these discussions is that if this war drags on, our defeat is certain. I believe this is a threat to the very existence of Elpis. Therefore, the kingdom of Elpis will formally surrender to the Zhejian Kantine Kingdom." The ministers were stunned, and the room erupted in murmurs. "Surrender? That's unthinkable. How could we possibly surrender to those lowlifes? If anything, they should be the ones apologizing to us for the deaths of Elam and His Highness Lesuth." Dudan thought to himself, "This resistance is stronger than I expected." He held up a hand and said, "Settle down. I've already explained the situation." But one of the ministers shot back, "What surrender? If it were Lebalebu, sooth His Highness, he would never have dreamed of doing this, just what we'd expect from a spare heir, a truly powerless and incompetent man." These words sent Dudan into a rage. A vein throbbed on his forehead as he glared down at them, demanding, "Who said that? Who was it that just laughed?" A magic circle began to form in his hand. He roared, "Who just laughed?" The crowd of ministers parted, leaving a single man standing alone. The man stammered, Wait, no, I didn't mean anything by it." But as he spoke, steam started to pour from his eye sockets. The water in his body was literally boiling away, and he let out a horrific scream. The entire court was in an uproar. His body's water is evaporating. So, before their very eyes, Dudan was casting the spell. Steam billowed from the old official. A satisfied smirk crossed Dudan's face as he thought, "With my own power, with the power that is mine alone, I will change this kingdom." And in that moment, the future tyrant of Elpis was born. A heavy sack landed on the table with a thud. A tuft of what looked like white hair peeked out from the opening. Panic broke into a cold sweat as he glanced at Kim, who had just brought it in. Eyeing the sack, he said to Kim, "All right, with this, we're 1/4 of the way through our plan." Kim asked, "Who's the next target?" Panic replied, "I'm thinking about the dwarves, specifically their president, Suduk." Is that a problem? We are planning to take out the leader of another nation after all, and not just any nation. The Republic of Averma is an ally of our own kingdom, so I'll need to do a lot of prep work. The two continued their discussion. Kim asked, how long will that take? H. Panic answered, about 6 months. Kim noted, that's a lot shorter than I expected, so for the next half a year, will you need me for anything? H. Panic shook his head. Not unless something unexpected comes up. Kim turned to leave and said, all right then, I'm taking a vacation. H. Panic asked, a bit suddenly, don't you think? Where are you off to? He thought to himself, what is he scheming this time? Kim paused for a moment, then said, back to the place where I first woke up when I arrived in this world. I'm going to the Great Forest, that place with the stone pillars that pierce the sky and an endless sea of trees below. The Great Forest, living up to its name, is a massive woodland on the EL1 continent. It's an incredibly vast and sprawling expanse of wilderness. It's divided into 3 main zones: the entrance, the central region, and the deep forest. The entrance area is mostly home to smaller monsters like badgers, bears, and snakes. As you go deeper, you'll find tougher creatures, and if you venture far enough in, you'll start to run into truly dangerous beasts like dragons. I figure I'll go back to my roots, Kim thought, and look for that dragon I remember from my first time here. It was a massive red dragon with 2 horns. I've also come to a pretty important realization. Out of all the abilities I currently have, none of them are going to cut it in the deep forest. Not my X-ray vision, not my body enhancement, not my transformations, and not even my dragonification ability. The little monsters I ate near the entrance are nothing compared to the things living deeper in that part of the forest. That red dragon is probably just middle tier on the food chain. It explains why the one I ate before made its nest so close to the entrance. Just as Kim was thinking this, the tall, sharp pillars came into view. Suddenly, a pair of long ears popped up from the grass. It was a rabbit, with pink eyes nibbling on some grass. In a flash, Kim was right behind it. The rabbit sensed him instantly. Kim lunged forward with all his strength, but the little creature had already vanished, reappearing a good distance away. Kim sighed, way too fast. What I need out here isn't a reptile's physical power, but the ability to hide and run. 1 week later, back at the same spot near the tall pillars, the pink-eyed rabbit was grazing peacefully on the grass. This time, however, Kim was gradually appearing behind the rabbit without it noticing. Kim took down the rabbit and thought, in just 1 week, I've managed to get back the skills I need. He looked at the rabbit on the ground and continued his thought. All creatures on the E1 continent have mana. To completely block their ability to detect mana, I used a skill from an animal back on Earth, a chemical compound I cooked up by tweaking a squid's camouflage with chemicals from the dungeon's core, the invisibility skill. Kim picked up the rabbit thinking, and I've adapted 2-leg movement for a 4-legged creature. With this, I've got all the basic survival skills covered. Now I can head into the deep forest. In the deep forest region of the Great Forest, Kim walked down a path lined with lush trees. He looked around and wondered, is this the entrance? To the deep forest, it doesn't look much different from the central area. Suddenly, something came falling from right above Kim. He reacted in a flash and jumped out of the way. A glob of green slime landed right where he'd been standing. The slime suddenly lurched, reaching out and slicing Kim's body clean in half. Kim collapsed. He glanced over at his attacker. A slime, Kim muttered. In front of him was a wriggling mass of green slime. Kim's torso and legs were now in 2 different places, with the slime sitting nearby. Kim's lower half pushed itself up on one leg and managed to stand, but the slime attacked again, slicing right through both his knees. And just like that, his legs were detached from his body. As Kim waited for new legs to sprout, he watched the slime and thought, it can sense vibrations from the ground like some kind of earth sense master. Another name for it is iron fluid, he recalled, when it sliced through his knees, and noted, by launching itself from a tight space, its slicing power increases tremendously. With that in mind, Kim slammed his fist into the ground. The slime immediately lashed out, severing his arm at the shoulder. Kim glanced at the arm on the ground and decided, I'll bait it into attacking by creating vibrations on purpose. He watched as the slime slithered past his severed arm. The moment the slime crawled over it, Kim licked his lips, thinking, and when it's right where I want it, a wicked grin spread across his face. A moment later, he was walking again, continuing deeper into the forest. In the distance were 2 mountains side by side, one a volcano, the other capped with snow. Kim thought to himself, that iron fluid is really strong. You could even call it the master of slicing attacks. If High Panic were here, he'd probably be dead by now. Still, I can't use his power. Kim came to this conclusion after absorbing the slime. He looked at the trembling bit of slime in his hand and thought, slimes are formless, so their ability is pretty useless when combined with my own experience. And since it has no real intelligence, the slime's own experience is totally worthless to me, too. Back at the swampy entrance to the Great Forest, countless trees lay shattered. Huge mud puddles dotted the landscape. This was the home of the lizardmen, a race of lizard-headed beast folk who once worshipped dragons. Someone approached and said, "What a complete mess." The speaker was John-Hen, a holy knight from the temple of the goddess. With her was a young woman dressed in temple robes. John-Hen said, "What in the world could have happened here? I don't see a single lizard man. There aren't any bodies, so they must have all relocated." John-Hen surveyed the mounds of earth and the surrounding swamp. Taking it all in, she continued, "We don't have a choice. It might be difficult, but our only option is to ask the locals." The young woman with her asked the locals. She was a saintess candidate from the temple of the goddess Inner. John-Hen replied, "That's right, Lady Saintess candidate. I hear there's an orc village nearby. Let's head there." Meanwhile, Kim hadn't expected this green dragon to hit so hard right from the get-go. He realized he had been getting too complacent and needed to reassess his strength in the central region. Kim focused his power and unleashed a single decisive blow. The monster green dragon couldn't dodge it. The creature crashed to the ground, its limbs severed, and it began coughing up black blood. The monster was furious. What on earth was this being to possess such extraordinary power? As for Kim, he also realized something. The slime's power was incredibly difficult to control. Kim had transformed his hand into the shape of a slime and mimicked its attack style. However, the form was unstable and its power didn't even come close to the original slime's. If Kim had known this monster could be dismembered so easily, he wouldn't have bothered with such a complicated attack in the first place. Kim walked toward the green dragon. It was terrified, pleading for him to stay away. Kim could feel that he had gotten much stronger. Meanwhile, John-Hen and Inner arrived at the Oni area, the land of the orcs. The scenery was desolate and bleak. From what John-Hen could tell, the situation hadn't changed much. She had always thought that all orcs were savage brutes, but maybe that wasn't true for all of them. She noticed that the custom of mourning the dead was practiced here. John-Hen knelt, spotting a bouquet of flowers next to a grave. She picked it up to get a closer look. She deduced that the bouquet had been left there recently. Up on higher ground, an orc holding a shovel named Bojia was watching. Seeing John-Hen and Aner, he called out. Noticing the orc's aggressive stance, John-Hen immediately moved to shield Aner. She said Burrs was with two people from the theocracy, and he couldn't help but wonder why they were here. Junhyun explained that she was curious about what had happened. At her words, Burrs' expression suddenly turned grim. He angrily explained that a monster had shown up, set a trap, and started a war with the dragons. That war wiped out all the orcs, which is why the village is in this state. Junhyun grew worried, wondering if Lyrithman village had also met a similar fate. Burrs grimly added that everyone there was probably eaten. He wasn't certain, but he had a strong suspicion that the monster's active period was about to begin again. The news filled Burrs, Junhyun, and Inner with great sorrow. Junhyun and Inner decided to pray to the goddess for the departed souls to rest in peace. Just then, Burrs formally introduced himself, giving his name and his title as a Wanderer of Lanark. The title Wanderer is a huge honor, one that only the strongest warriors can earn. Burrs' mission is to patrol the vast forest, keeping an eye out for any unusual activity or dangers. The village's tragedy began when that thing showed up while Burrs was on one of his routine patrols. Junhyun was curious about what that thing Burrs was talking about. He described it as a vehicle made of iron. The strangest part was that it didn't use horses. All the demi-humans inside had died from broken necks. It definitely wasn't an accident, Burrs stated firmly. He also noted that the people inside were wearing very strange clothes and the vehicle's door had been opened from the outside. Shortly after this discovery, something strange began to happen in the forest. All the buffalo vanished. A similar thing had happened in Lyrithman, which made Burrs uneasy, so he rushed back to his village. When he arrived, he was met with this tragic scene. Junhyun immediately picked up on something odd. It was clear Burrs wasn't there when it happened, so how could he know all the details? In response, Burrs drew the sword from his back and held out his hand toward Junhyun, suggesting she take his hand if she wanted to know how. Junhyun was a little hesitant, but she did as he asked, and took his hand. Suddenly, an orange light flashed around her, and she felt a surge of magical power. Junhyun guessed it was time attribute magic. She was surprised that someone outside the elven kingdom of Lesuth could use it. However, Burrs clarified that it wasn't just spirit attribute magic or some low-level skill. It was a psychic ability. By touching an object, Burrs had the power to read its memories. Junhyun realized that this must be how Burrs identified the culprit. The steel vehicle, Lyrithman village, and the broadsword all held the same memory of a single creature, a creature that had appeared in the Great Forest not long ago. That monster was back. Burrs' psychometry resonated, pinpointing the creature's location right there in the forest. From the outside, the Great Forest looked perfectly normal. But deep inside, it was a completely different story. It housed a demon realm beyond imagination where ice, snow, and lava coexisted. It was a place where the ecosystem had evolved under incredibly harsh conditions. The first area one would see was a high mountain standing alone in a region of snow and ice, its peak covered by 10,000-year-old glaciers. Among all the dragon species, only one could adapt and survive there, the ice dragon. Suddenly, the memory of the red dragon and its earth-shaking roar came rushing back. The scene of the dragon taking to the sky, Over Sartakfit town flashed before her eyes. The town was engulfed in a sea of fire. People were running for their lives, and then there was the boy. The dragon brutally swallowed the entire town in flames. A single breath incinerated more than half the city. Candidate. Saintess Inner was suddenly shaken from her vision by Junhyun's voice. Junhyun called her name again, and Inner slowly came to, still a bit dazed. Junhyun kindly asked if she was all right or feeling unwell. Inner quickly replied, "No, nothing's wrong. I'm fine, I was just lost in thought." Birds reminded them to stay on their guard since they didn't know when the monster might appear. Inner quickly nodded. In truth, her head had been throbbing on and off ever since they arrived. Inner didn't understand what that memory was. All about or why it kept popping into her head so often. It had been getting especially worse since they arrived. As Inner walked, she wondered, could I have forgotten something really important? Meanwhile, in the central part of the great mountain forest, Kim had set up an ambush, hiding behind a tree in the snowy woods. In front of him were 3 ice dragons, chasing a small monster. A 4-legged deer-like creature was running for its life. Kim watched, thinking to himself, the snow mountain area. Even though this is a fantasy world, the creatures here still seem to follow the basic laws of physics. So what's the principle behind the cold air here? He wondered. This was also the reason he had come here. Just then, one of the ice dragons opened its mouth to use its dragon's breath, spewing a stream of pure white energy at the deer-like monster. The small creature was instantly frozen solid, becoming a large, unmoving block of ice from the deathly cold. Kim stayed hidden behind the tree, observing silently. He raised a finger that had started to turn, touched his finger, it also froze in an instant. At first, he'd assumed the intense cold was created by liquid nitrogen, but he was mistaken. This wasn't cold air, it was just water. Kim mused that the ice dragon's breath didn't cool the air itself, but rather they spat out a special water. Wherever this water landed, the temperature would plummet, causing it to freeze solid. Meanwhile, the 3 ice dragons from before carefully picked up the frozen deer monster to take back to their lair. Kim also deduced that this particular attack could only be used within the snowy mountain area. He continued to analyze the situation. After observing the ice dragon's lifestyle, he came to one conclusion. They had evolved to suit the harsh environment of this place. Kim followed their trail to the base of the mountain where the ice dragon's lair was located. He understood that this evolution wasn't about becoming stronger. It might have even made them weaker since they didn't hunt directly. An evolved ice dragon would spend most of its time hibernating to conserve the body's energy. In spite of that, in order to adapt to the snowy mountain region, it had developed an anti-freeze body, which was precisely what Kim was after. He gave a hungry smile and quickly transformed into his red dragon form. Kim opened his massive jaws, facing the helpless dragon lying there. A short while later, the other ice dragons returned from their exhausting hunt. They swiftly approached the cave entrance and landed. One of them froze in horror at the sight. Before them, a red dragon standing over the remains of their kinsman, which was now just a head, a tail, and a portion of its ribcage. It shrieked in panic. "What have you done?" Kim glared. "I was trying to turn into an ice dragon while you were gone, but you showed up much faster than I anticipated." The enraged dragon spat out its power, freezing everything in sight. "Do you even know where you are? That you dare to do something like this?" The beam of cold swept across the cave's interior. It gloated. "You fool to barge into our nest." But from within the icy mist, strange sounds echoed. Suddenly, what looked like a tentacle shot out, striking the ice dragon hard in the neck. The impact sent it tumbling backward as Kim emerged from the mist. The tentacle was his transformed right arm. The result of absorbing the ice dragon was learning the exact composition and the most effective ratio needed to create an anti-freeze body. Kim's body continued to transform from his position near the dragon's tail. In the blink of an eye, he had already lunged forward. The 2 ice dragons couldn't keep up with his speed at all. Kim swung his 2 powerful arms and tore into the 2 dragons' necks. He landed gently. Behind him, the 2 large ice dragons collapsed onto the cold, icy ground. He paid them no mind, thinking, from this day on, the ecosystem of the snowy mountain area of the great forest will begin to change now that the ice dragons are gone. And with that, Kim looked toward his next target, the volcanic mountain nearby. At that moment, at the center of the great forest, in the intermediate zone between the snowy mountain and the volcano, John Hen had to ask the Saintess candidate if she still had the strength to continue. They had been walking for quite some time. Ener nodded. "I'm still fine." John Hen, based on her observations, made an assessment. Ener wasn't breathing too heavily, nor was she short of breath or showing signs of exhaustion, so she believed that Ener was telling the truth. John Hen nodded. "If you feel tired, Ener, tell me right away." Brat emerged from the bushes, causing John Hen to immediately raise her guard. Brat was holding the sword from earlier and motioned for the 2 of them to keep moving. The 3 of them continued on. Suddenly, Brat's sword began to react strongly to something. It vibrated intensely. A moment later, The sword seemed to try and plunge itself into the ground. Brat quickly tightened his grip to stop it. It was reacting to the fiery footprints. On the ground, Brat knew immediately that the person they were searching for was definitely nearby. Furthermore, Brat pointed out that these footprints, just by looking at them, were clearly not from a natural fire. "Are these monster tracks?" John Hen asked. Brat looked a bit serious and replied, "Probably." They followed the direction of the footprints and advanced cautiously. After a short distance, a powerful blast of hot air suddenly blew from the volcano's direction. John Hen covered her face from the intense heat. Brat broke into a sweat, staring ahead. "It's him," Brat said. Kim was indeed standing there, practically brimming with fire energy. He sensed another presence and glanced back. Looking absolutely terrifying. In the volcanic region of the Great Forest, Kim ventured deeper. The creatures living in the volcano were nameless. He just stared at the magical creatures swimming in the lava with a look of pure craving. Because the ground itself was molten and the terrain was constantly shifting, no one had ever been able to get close enough to observe this place. Kim continued to press forward. He didn't care about those things, not about anything except for one monster in particular. He thought to himself, "It's been a while since I've seen the scales of a salamander." Kim casually wiped some ash from the corner of his mouth. It seems all the creatures that used to live here were completely wiped out even, driven to extinction. He figured this whole situation had created Kim theorized that a body is basically a chemical factory. It seems his body produces a special chemical substance, which is basically a type of fuel, making the ice dragon a giant walking fuel tank. The dragon's blood vessels then circulate this fuel all throughout its body, and the sweat glands, well, they're designed to expel that fuel through the skin. All it takes is contact with the body heat of a lava creature for it to instantly ignite. When you put it all together, Kim was for all intents and purposes a monster. As his entire body erupted in flames, Kim angrily wondered who in the world had the nerve to sneak into this place. As it turned out, it was a very special group of people. John Hen recognized her master at a glance and called out to him twice, but Borjat, right beside her, just stomped the ground in fury. He roared, accusing Kim of wiping out his entire tribe. Kim slowly turned to get a better look at Borjat. "You're Borjat the Wanderer," he said, much to Borjat's surprise. "How do you know my name?" With a smirk, Kim's face began to shift and change. In an instant, he wore the face of the Orc tribe's chief, adding that inside the tribe there wasn't a single soul who didn't know him. Borjat was stunned. "Chief!" he cried, before charging forward in a rage. "How dare you wear?" The chief's face. He rushed in, swinging his sword straight at Kim, who didn't even bother to raise a defense. The attack from Borjat barely managed to scratch Kim's outer layer of skin. Borjat kept slashing at him relentlessly, but it didn't seem to have any effect at all. It's possible even Kim was a little surprised by how tough his new skin was. Borjat declared that he had been training for this very moment, waiting for his chance at revenge. With that, he tightened his grip on his sword, cursing Kim and vowing to send him to the great beyond with one final strike. Borjat stabbed at Kim's body over and over, each thrust unbelievably fast and powerful, yet Kim didn't dodge. He just stood there and took every single hit without a word. At that moment, his skin began to secrete a subtle poison. Borjat continued his assault, aiming for the head, and as the poisonous gas began to billow out more strongly, he remained completely oblivious. John Hen, watching the fight from a safe distance, didn't dare get any closer. She was completely torn. Her new friend was fighting her master. She had to help, but who? On one hand, Borjat had a noble cause, avenging the monster that slaughtered his people. But on the other, Master Kim was a guardian of the kingdom, one of its dedicated knights. While she was stuck, wondering who to support, John Hen suddenly caught the scent of poison wafting her way. Startled, she immediately backed away and rushed over to Inner. She grabbed Inner by the waist without a single word of explanation, simply telling her to hold on tight. Before Inner could even ask what was happening, John Hen had thrown her over her shoulder and was running for their lives, trying to get as far away as possible. Inner was completely bewildered by the sudden turn of events. As they fled, John Hen managed to explain that it was a deadly venom. Meanwhile, the poisonous gas had completely enveloped the area around Borjat and Kim. By the time Borjat realized he had inhaled a massive amount of the poison, it was already too late. He coughed, calling Kim a despicable coward. He tried to steady his sword, determined to take Kim down with one last desperate blow. Gathering what little strength he had left, Borjat lunged and stabbed at Kim's chest. But his blade still couldn't pierce Kim's skin. He just stood there completely unfazed. Borjat's body began to tremble violently from the poison's effects. Impossible, he sputtered, realizing that after all that, he hadn't managed to leave even a single scratch on Kim. Then Borjat lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Kim just watched silently. He glanced at Borjat's body set it ablaze, but for once he didn't devour it. Instead, he just tossed it aside. In the distance, John Hen was still carrying Inner, running as fast as she could. Inner was struggling, begging John Hen to put her down since Borjat was still back there. But John Hen flatly refused. Her one and only mission was to protect Inner. Inner naively insisted that it wasn't. too late, and that if they worked together, they could still save him. But John-hen shot that idea down, immediately saying it was hopeless. It was far too late. Iner stammered, trying to argue, but John-hen simply recited the first lesson she ever learned during her training to become a holy knight. A battle is never decided by a simple comparison of strength. John-hen urged Iner to be realistic about her own abilities. She couldn't allow the rare and precious saintess to walk straight into her own grave. Iner pointed out that while Borjat had incredible vitality, his raw strength and magic were quite low. As for Kim, he had probably gained some kind of ability related to extreme heat. John-hen agreed, saying that was precisely why, even if they teamed up, they couldn't possibly defeat Kim. Their only option was to leave Borjat behind and escape. John-hen added that this is how any normal person would assess the situation. John-hen was about to say something more about her master, but she stopped, warning that they shouldn't think of him in such simple terms. She didn't notice that something was falling from the sky just behind her. It landed with a thud right in front of them, forcing John-hen to a sudden halt and cutting her off mid-sentence. It was a charred corpse. John-hen could only stare in shock. Seeing the familiar sword still clutched in its hand, she knew without a doubt that this was Borjat. Suddenly, the sound of crackling flames and steady footsteps approached from behind, sending a chill down her spine. John-hen broke into a cold sweat as she slowly looked back. She had no idea what Kim was thinking. If he assumed she and Borjat were working together, every one of her senses was screaming at her to run. She was terrified, trying not to imagine what Kim might do next. Then Kim's voice cut through the air. "Long time no see, disciple," he continued a little too cheerfully. "Now we can finally have a nice long chat, can't we?" He figured she must be overjoyed. That up until now, John-hen had always called him master and practically clung to his side, but now he was calling her his disciple. Kim gave a menacing smile and told John-hen to smile back, his own face darkening with anger as he said they could finally talk freely. Confused, John-hen stood silently watching Kim, whose body was ablaze, and cursed under her breath as Iner glanced at him. She then hopped down from John-hen's shoulder. Taking a ready stance, Iner glared at Kim, gritted her teeth in fury, and demanded to know why he killed Brack, her tone, implying that her next move depended on his answer. John-hen came up from behind and gripped Iner's hand tightly. She smiled and told Kim it had been a while. Iner shot her a look, wondering why she was calling him master and if they knew each other. John-hen, feeling just as anxious, promised to explain later and told Iner to just stay put for now. Hearing John-hen's greeting, Kim agreed that it had indeed been a long time since he'd met one of his own kind, which made him think of Midden. During their fight, his expression had been so focused. Kim mentioned that he had mistaken Midden for one of his own, but in the end, that wasn't the case. John-hen deliberately dragged out the conversation, saying she was curious about who Kim met after Manti, all while frantically trying to buy enough time to send a message back to the Papal State. Kim fell right into her trap, replying that it was a master shapeshifter. Kim then said the name Meeden HBH. For Iner, it was like a bolt of lightning. Her face darkened and she clutched her head. She repeated the name once more. Seeing her reaction, a worried John-hen called out to her. With trembling hands, Iner gripped her head and kept repeating the name. Suddenly her eyes shot wide open as darkness seemed to swallow her. She called out his name as it brought back memories that Iner P.R. Hovan, the Saintess's descendant, had fought so hard to forget. The story flashes back 3 years to the port city of Staksfid. The scene was grim with piles of rubble everywhere. An image appeared of a dragon breathing fire and destroying everything in its path. A little girl, having survived the dragon's attack on Staksfid, was trapped under a large rock. She slowly opened her eyes and sat up, completely bewildered by the devastation around her. Her face was a mask of pain and fear, because she had lost an arm. The little girl was Midden's sister Manon, a half-demon and half-elf. In that moment, she struggled to call out for her brother. Minon frantically scanned her surroundings and called out his name again. Despite losing an arm, the small girl searched everywhere for any sign of her brother. After looking for some time, Minon finally discovered her brother's whereabouts. Her search revealed that Midden had gone to a human city. She headed there immediately, but because of her Mena and elven blood, she caught the attention of the Papal State. They had people tail the young girl, and afterward, the Papal State helped alter her memories and gave her a new arm. The closer she came to becoming a saintess, the more her skin began to change. And that's how Iner P.R. Hovan, the saintess's descendant, was born. Her entire body turned white, except for the arm the church gave her, which was a noticeably different color. The Holy Knight escorting her on her pilgrimage to the Holy Land had a biochip implanted in their head, which would evaluate both of their abilities throughout the journey. Based on the results, a decision would be made on whether or not they'd be promoted. John-hen tightly gripped the sword in her hand. With their noble mission, the two were as inseparable as a shadow from its body. Iner P.R. Hovan was to complete her 3-year training to become a saintess, accompanied by Pitt, the disciple of the monstrous Holy Knight. And so the two of them headed towards the great forest, together on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. An indescribable feeling began to stir in Iner's mind. She frowned, wincing, as she forced out the words, Midden HBH. What happened to him? Kim recalled his memory of Midden and then calmly replied that he was dead. Iner's eyes widened, her face completely blank as she repeated to herself that he was dead. Suddenly, her eyes turned a milky white. Ener exploded in a rage as fierce winds whipped around her, her eyes seeming to glow with power. Ener appeared to go berserk, screaming that she could never forgive him. But before she could attack Kim, she fainted and collapsed onto the ground. A wicked smile spread across Kim's face as he commented that this made things easier, especially since John Hen had mentioned being tired. John Hen lifted Ener, retorting defensively that she was just saying that earlier and had trained very hard since then. John Hen gave a strained smile, explaining that she was in the middle of a mission and asking if they could maybe postpone their chat for another time. She appeared cheerful on the outside, but inwardly John Hen was panicking because she had tried to contact the papal state for backup, but the mana concentration in the Great Forest was too dense, making it impossible to get a signal through. John Hen was startled when Kim took a step forward. Flustered, she quickly explained that they had no hostile intentions toward him and had only just met that blockhead from before. They only came this way because it was on their pilgrimage route to the holy shrine. John Hen told Kim he couldn't possibly kill her, not with the papal state involved. Kim bluntly replied that she had chosen the wrong place for that argument. While John Hen was still trying to understand what was going on, Kim waved his hand and the flames surrounding him shot out. He then turned to leave, telling her to follow him, explaining that it's impossible to contact the papal state unless they go somewhere with less mana. John Hen silently watched Kim's retreating back, thinking to herself that it seemed her time wasn't up just yet. Meanwhile, in the village of Liasem, in the Great Forest, one of the holy sites of the goddess's sect, lived Holy Knight Liam, who was one of the most famous knights from the early days of the papal state. Hailing from the B-rank dragon forest near the lizardman's home, John Hen stood behind Kim and began to speak. Liz, the lizardmen of the Great Forest were located in a very secluded and hard-to-assault spot, but nearby a stronghold resembling a holy altar had been built. John Hen boldly shared her opinion, saying, if they go there, then communicating... As she was speaking, she suddenly heard a voice calling out to her in her mind. John Hen's eyes widened in surprise as the voice continued asking what had happened. Just then, a figure appeared behind John Hen. She seemed to be possessed as the figure began to control her body and spoke. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Code. Name PP-TR13. I am Hilton, the one who manages and commands the Holy Knights. Kim looked at the person behind John, his eyes welling up with tears. John Hen, her eyes now glowing blue, continued, it's an honor to meet the Knight of Knights. Hearing this, Kim immediately cut to the chase with Hilton, who was possessing John Hen's body. He told the entity to drop the pleasantries and get to the point. John Hen, her eyes vacant as if hypnotized, asked him what he was planning. Kim immediately shot back that it should be, what do you want? John Hen then questioned if he truly understood the current situation. Kim's hands relaxed as he slowly replied, so monitoring and terrorizing the Holy Knight and the Saintess's descendant while destroying the Holy Land, not to mention the series of massacres that have occurred. A blue light emanated from John Hen's eyes as she said, and you think you're in any position to make demands in Kim. Hearing this calmly made a proposal. What if I escort these two safely out of the Great Forest? John Hen silently considered Kim's offer. Losing a holy knight and a descendant of the Saintess would be a tremendous loss, and what's more, Pitt was a very special individual. After a moment of thought, John Hen finally agreed, asking, what do you want me? Kim smiled before he made his request. It's nothing too difficult, just act as if nothing happened here in this forest. John Hen agreed. As Kim turned to leave, he added one more thing to ensure she'd keep her promise. You'd better. Kim quickly moved away, leaving John Hen to carry Ener on her back. Ener's eyes fluttered open. She had actually woken up a while ago and had overheard the entire conversation between the two. Kim strode forward, thinking to himself that all the unnecessary distractions were now out of the way. Now I can focus on my real goal. Kim thought of High Panic, his face contorting with rage. It's time for that. Emperor to build his nation's foundation on the heads of other rulers. The moment the thought crossed his mind, Kim transformed into Eliza. Ardman, his entire body wreathed in flames. His long tail, covered in sharp spikes, dragged along the ground. Suddenly the ground began to shake. Two massive monsters were fiercely battling each other while Kim stood below, just watching them. He flashed a sinister smile. It was time for a happy meal, a great forest special. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Everma, land of the Torch King, countless citizens were gathered in front of City Hall. A dwarf with a two-tufted beard stood on a platform delivering a speech. The old man offered his thanks and promised that the kingdom of Everma would now adopt a democratic republic. Behind a glass window, a figure silently observed the scene. It was none other than the Torch King Biko Gannet. His face was flushed and he was seemingly furious as he thought, what in the world is a president elected by voting, gazing at the old man addressing the crowd? He grew even angrier, believing the man to be a nobody who had somehow become a ruler. Clearly, someone was behind this despicable trick. Otherwise, the citizens wouldn't be so fanatical. With that, Biko swung his cape, dramatically demanding to be allowed to save the endangered kingdom himself. Biko imperiously ordered his men to prepare for a visit to Jukeon Tin, their allied kingdom. but his command was met with a stark silence. There was no one there. Biko's earlier bravado vanished into thin air. The power he had maintained for hundreds of years had collapsed in just 6 months. Suddenly, the door creaked open and Biko was overjoyed, thinking he still had one loyal servant left. But he was mistaken. It was Kim, looking absolutely terrifying. His arm was deformed, resembling a dragon's. His eyes sparked with fire and his voice was heavy. "Found it. The second head." Biko was frantic with fear, not knowing who this person was. In his panic, he arrogantly challenged Kim. But in the blink of an eye, Biko's head was hanging upside down, officially logged off from life. Back at the kingdom of Gyeongkyeon-tin, inside the emperor's office, Kim suddenly burst through the door. Without warning, startling High Panic. He entered carrying a bloodstained sack, his tone seemingly annoyed, as he chided High Panic for not getting the joke. High Panic calmly replied that the goddess had already verified everything. A king and a president are completely different things. Kim seemed to understand, noting that the brainwashing skill had also improved greatly. At this, High Panic gritted his teeth. With him, it was admittedly almost perfect. The research results were quite good too, but there was one problem. Kim put on a puzzled expression. And what problem is that? High Panic immediately brought up Portis. Portis was the only nation with aerial defense capabilities that opposed the dictatorial regime of the Gyeongkyeon kingdom. The reason for this was its prime location for transporting goods, both in times of peace and war. However, its history of being trampled by the Anbasalam kingdom made it a rather weak nation. In Portis, a large number of rebel forces had appeared. The situation remained unstable, but if Portis were to fall now, there would be many model. In a tight spot, H-Panic showered Kim with praise, hoping for his help with the matter. Kim cut right to the chase and asked what he wanted. A temporary fix or a permanent solution? H-Panic was ecstatic to hear this. Naturally, he chose the permanent option. But what about the people? Kim then explained that the permanent method was to wipe 42 completely off the continent and build a new civilization. A helpless H-Panic could only clasp his hands and beg him to stop quickly settling for the temporary method. A few days later, at 42, Naval Commander Kenza Amir was surveying her surroundings. Today, the Guardian Duke of the Gijon Kingdom was scheduled to arrive for an inspection, so she needed to be on her toes. Just as Kenza was praying for things to go smoothly, Kim suddenly landed right in front of her. She froze for a few seconds before realizing the rumors about the Guardian Duke's shape-shifting abilities were true. Panicked, Kenza opened her mouth to greet Kim, but another voice cut her off. "Long live the Free Republic of 42. Hooray." Kim turned to look at the man in the tightly wrapped cloak with a judgmental stare, wondering what on earth he was doing. Quickly, he whipped off his cloak, revealing his body was covered in lit bombs. His intention was clearly to assassinate Kim, but it wasn't going to be that easy. Kim unfurled his wings. With a single flap, the flames of the bomb fuses were all snuffed out. The lingering wind was still quite powerful. The man was surprised, but didn't give up. He tried to strike another match, intending to light the fuse again, but a hand clamped down on his wrist, squeezing it tightly. He was in so much pain that he dropped to his knees, letting out a piercing scream. Only after Kim had the situation handled did people finally arrive. They offered their apologies and asked if he was all right. Kim just glanced at them briefly before ordering the man to be taken to an interrogation room. Within 4 walls, there was only 1 table and 2 chairs with 2 people sitting across from each other. Kim began to question him about the source of the explosives. The only response he got was a stream of vulgar and uncivilized words and nothing else. Kim calmly said it was fine if he didn't want to talk, then slowly stood up. Kim approached him 1 step at a time. The man thought he could keep his mouth shut, but when he saw Kim begin to transform, he certainly couldn't stay calm any longer. Outside, someone was guarding the door. Kenza suddenly walked up, and the guard snapped to attention. She introduced herself and mentioned she heard Kim had requested support from the Navy. The guard, being just a regular messenger, was pretty relaxed and easily let Kenza inside. As soon as she entered, she seriously questioned Kim. Seeing the scene before her, it seemed her help wasn't actually needed. Small wooden fragments were scattered on the floor, likely from something that had been smashed to bits. Wasn't Kim interrogating the terrorist, but the man was nowhere to be seen. The veins on Kim's face began to recede, and his skin quickly returned to normal. Standing before Kenza, Kim mentioned the Red Pinwheel. She also knew of the place. It was a pub in the Central District. Kim's request was for Kenza to lead him there, as it was the hiding place of the 42 rebels. Kim knew this because he had just eaten the man and absorbed his memories. It was still slower than he predicted. He still needed 2 more heads. Thinking this, Kim sighed. Kenza watched, finding it all incredibly confusing. After everything, she was a bit afraid of him. Meanwhile, Kim was already planning how to deal with her panic. In the middle of the city, a person in a green cloak was standing by at the Red Pinwheel pub near the 42 barracks. A noisy crowd was gathered. Kenza opened the door and let a few more people inside. The pub owner was wiping a plate. Seeing her, he smiled warmly, greeting her and asking why she'd been a stranger. Kenza also smiled, explaining that the rebels had been quite active lately and turned to introduce Sir Kim. But just then, a red arm shot past her face and slammed into someone. Splat. Kenza was stunned, not understanding what was happening. When she finally processed it, she saw that Kim had used his monstrous arm to crush a man's skull. Everyone in the pub saw this and screamed in terror, shouting that there was a murderer before fleeing for their lives. The pub owner, utterly bewildered, asked Kim why he would suddenly do such a thing. At that moment, Kim, radiating a murderous aura, looked at him and growled, demanding the location of the stolen supplies. Seeing this, the pub owner understood the situation. He immediately pulled out a gun, aimed it at the center of Kim's forehead, and fired without a moment's hesitation. Kenza witnessed this in disbelief, crying out his name. The pub owner held the gun with a dangerous, cold expression, saying they'd have to crack his head open to find out. But his triumphant expression was short-lived. When the gunpowder smoke cleared, Kim was still standing there solid as a rock, because he had managed to catch the bullet in his teeth. Before the owner could do anything else, Kim reached out with his transformed hand and grabbed his head, slamming it against the wall with enough force to shatter it and create a large hole. Kim discovered the space behind the wall was hollow, revealing a staircase leading down to a secret floor. The pub owner was knocked unconscious. The royal assassin, who had been with them the whole time but hadn't said a word, finally spoke up, saying that if the job had been left to him, he would have found the place in a much smarter way. But Kim felt his way was faster. Seeing the two of them preparing to go inside and investigate, Kenza was still astonished that a pub would have a secret basement. Afterward, the three of them went down together. Kenza suddenly noticed something. She walked over to a large crate and raised her hand to touch the naval insignia on it. These crates held the army's stolen supplies. Looking at the crates, the explosives had been opened. Her suspicions flared, thinking rebels must have infiltrated the Navy, remembering the soldiers who had died, sacrificing themselves. Kenji's anger boiled over her fists, trembling. In a stroke of luck, the supplies had been found. Kim decided to leave and hand over the rest of the investigation to Kenji. He walked up the stairs one step at a time. Just then, the tavern owner, who had been knocked out cold, began to groan as he came to. Suddenly, a few drops of liquid splattered onto his face. He groggily opened his eyes only to see a gaping crimson snake's mouth about to snap down on him. A moment later, Kim had finished off the tavern owner and shifted back to his human form. He was still chewing and swallowing forcefully, when he suddenly remembered something and called out a name, John Furr. Meanwhile, in a certain town, a man in a hooded blue cloak blended seamlessly into the crowd. He ducked into a small deserted alley and slipped into a building with a red curtained entrance. Inside, 4 people were sitting around a table. They were discussing the tavern owner's capture and had already started moving on to Plan B. However, a man with a pirate-style eye patch shot the idea down, reminding them that the person who captured the tavern owner was the Lord Protector of G. That little piece of information sent the others into a panic. A man in a green hood grew anxious, realizing that the person they were up against was Kim. Just then, the man in the blue cloak entered casually, interrupting their meeting. He was none other than John Furr, a hybrid, monkey beastman. He pulled back his hood, revealing a vial of bright red liquid, which he claimed was very difficult to get. The others looked at it with pure joy. Hearing that, Roe narrowed his eyes, confidently declaring that this potion would be a crucial stepping stone on their path to the day of inauguration. It was their chance to open a new world and establish a new era for the rebel army. Their hopes were instantly rekindled. Maybe this was the secret to finally dealing with Kim. At that very moment, the tavern owner, who had supposedly been captured, burst through the door, gasping for air. Seeing him, everyone was stunned, never expecting to see him alive. The tavern owner explained he was lucky to have escaped and asked John if the item in his hands was the real deal. John just smiled and confirmed that this would indeed help them get closer to the day of inauguration, a day to open a new world and establish a new era for the rebel army. But then, in a complete 180, the tavern owner's demeanor changed. He smiled calmly and said that the evidence and the culprits were all accounted for. As soon as he finished speaking, his entire body began to emit a purple gas, catching everyone completely off guard. Roe glanced at the purple gas floating toward him, confused about what it was. Suddenly his eyes flew wide open, his pupils shrank, and tears welled up in his eyes. The whole group started coughing violently before collapsing in a mess of tears, snot, and saliva. The tavern owner smirked and told them this was tear gas, an idea he'd borrowed from gas weapons. The other half of his face reverted to Kim's form. He sarcastically asked the group if they'd like to sing the national anthem one last time. The next day, at the execution ground in Potikenza, stood on a high platform holding a long spear. Beside her, Roe was bound and kneeling. Behind him were his accomplices, all of them captured. Below, the area was packed with citizens who had come to watch. Kenza, filled with righteous anger, shouted that the ringleader claimed he was liberating Poti for the rebel army, but was actually hiding a dark secret. The mastermind behind this is the Petal Universal Community, the United Nations of Beastmen. She then pointed her spear right at Roseface, saying, "He is the spy who was hiding among us." Behind her stood the captured humans, trembling. They were all high-ranking officials in the Navy who had been involved in the plot. Only now faced with their fate were these men, terrified and begging for their lives, while they were committing their crimes. They certainly weren't asking for leniency, but Kenza paid their pleas no mind. She took out the red vial and announced to the crowd, "This is the evidence we recovered from the scene." She then uncorked the vial, turned her head, and glanced at one of the men behind her. Before he could even say, "Do you know who I am?" she shoved the vial right into his mouth. The liquid spilled down his chin, unable to swallow it all. After he'd drunk the entire vial, he began coughing violently in pain. Once he caught his breath, he screamed at Kenza, demanding to know what she'd forced him to drink. Kenza was extremely calm as she glanced at him. "How foolish. You don't even recognize the secret weapon of the very people you were helping." Just as she finished speaking, veins began to bulge violently on his face. Terrified, he started pleading incoherently with Kenza. Immediately after, his body began to sprout gray fur on his face, shoulders, and thighs. His bloodshot eyes were slowly consumed by darkness, and then finally, he transformed into a gray wolf, his red eyes completely empty of humanity. He strained his muscles, snapping the ropes that bound him, and opened his mouth to roar. The crowd below was utterly confused to see a wolf, but upon seeing a werewolf that had completely lost all human reason and was drooling from its mouth, they screamed in terror, "It's one of the demon race!" A hand gripped a glass vial tightly as the dark red liquid was poured into the mouth of a bound man. His eyes stared blankly, his face a mask of struggle and despair. Following that was the sight of a normal person transforming into a wild wolf with bloodshot red eyes, a mouth wide open full of fangs, and drooling uncontrollably. That red potion, it turns out, is a mixture of dog and beastman blood. According to intelligence, any human who drinks it will transform. To some degree, this potion is connected to werewolves, the demon race, and beastmen. Furthermore, they had discovered that Z-Fader is a spy. It was revealed that within the Beastmen United Nations, some high-ranking officials from a demon tribe were actually beast demons themselves. In the Royal Assassin's room, the results of Kim's investigation were reported to High Panic. After listening, High Panic remarked that the Beastmen tribe and that the beast and demon tribes were difficult to tell apart, but he never expected them to use that fact to seize control of the Beastmen United Nations. He worried that if they didn't deal with the Demon King soon, the Beastmen United Nations might come after them next. However, he was certain that by using this tactic and ploy, they had already made them a target. High Panic smiled with satisfaction, surprised by such a perfect excuse to start a war. He thought to himself that the monster Kim was actually good for something besides just eating. HPIC decided to use the pretext that the Beastmen United Nations was merely a puppet of the Demon King to declare war, a glint of ambition and cunning shining in his eyes. Huge warships were lined up along the shore with countless people bustling about, signaling that a battle was imminent. Kim asked, "Hey, pick if these were warships." HPX ignored the question and said he'd thought of something amazing, which was to make these warships move on land. Seeing HPAC's expression, Kim suggested he should probably get some rest. Kim figured it would be better to just use the White Shark Legion on land. HPIC looked at him confused, pointing out that sharks can't move on land. Kim shot back, "Sharks can't, so warships can?" HPIC paused for a moment, then burst out laughing, telling himself, get a grip. He had simply said things in the wrong order. HPIC then announced that the world's strongest mage would be joining their forces in the battle. Over at the Kingdom of Elpis, its King Dudan announced to his court that Elpis would be participating in the war as an ally of Gurren-Canty. The courtiers were completely stunned by Dudan's abrupt decision. They urged the king to remember that the consequences of the last war were still lingering and that they should be focusing on rebuilding the country. The endless opposing arguments started to annoy Dudan. He cleaned out his ear and blew, declaring that it was too noisy. In an effort to silence the dissenting voices, their objections meant nothing to him. Dudan casually replied that he had already made up his mind and was just informing them of what needed to be done. This wasn't a discussion, it was a preparation for war. Dudan channeled power into his hand, showing off his brutal strength and challenging anyone who was still dissatisfied. Below, the courtiers trembled with fear, but still didn't voice their agreement. With a cold expression and wicked eyes, Dudan declared it was fated that he would lose a few loyal subjects today. The moment he finished speaking, Dudan unleashed his power, striking someone in the crowd. In an instant, all of the person's hair fell out as their body shriveled up. Death came swiftly for the unfortunate soul. The sight made the remaining courtiers too scared to utter another word of protest. Terrified, they all knelt in submission. Satisfied, Dudan ordered them to return and prepare for war. And just like that, the Kingdom of Elpis was forced to join the war. At the great naval power, the Ambalam Kingdom's naval port number 5, the warships had already been launched. The Allied forces under Gurren-Canty included Kim as the commander for the Gurren-Canty Kingdom, Grand Admiral Aitman as the commander for the Ambalam Kingdom, and Dudan as the commander representing the Elpis Kingdom. Japanik stood on the shore side by side with the king of the Ambalam Kingdom, Dan Ambalam. High Panic noted that everyone had arrived and thanked Dan for his help in this battle. Dan stayed silent, his expression clearly displeased. He was secretly fuming. If it weren't for the debt he owed from the time those mermen attacked, he would have never agreed to participate in this war. The power of Garen Canty was just too overwhelming to resist. Dan wondered how they planned to attack the Beastmen United Nations from this location. A part of the Ambalam Kingdom's territory separated Port Number 5 from the Beastmen United Nations. That's why Dan thought that if they were traveling by sea, other ports would have been much closer. But H. Panic replied that they weren't going by sea, but would march directly overland to their capital. Dan was shocked that High Panic planned to cross the mountains. But then, what were all the warships for H-Pac gave him a strange smile. He explained that they would cross the mountains by warship. Dan thought the man had lost his mind and was spouting nonsense, but suddenly a pillar of water erupted from the sea right in front of him. Seeing the giant water pillars like sea serpents rising from the ocean's depths, Dan was utterly astonished and had no idea what was happening. On the deck of a ship, Dan was casting a spell. His two hands generated two glowing magical circles, from which he controlled the ocean currents. Dan chanted Great Wave. At his command, gigantic waves rose up one after another. It didn't stop there. The pillars of water began lifting the massive warships completely out of the sea. This left Aitman horrified, unable to believe what he was seeing. The water pillars not only lifted the warships high into the air, but also carried them from the ocean onto the shore. Dan asked in pure amazement, "Is it really possible to move warships with water magic?" The miraculous pillars of water carried them over the tall trees and deep into the forest. Aitman, no longer looking horrified, just calmly took a drag from his cigarette. He thought to himself, this should do the trick. Just then, the royal assassin came up from behind and asked if something was on his mind. Aitman didn't answer, just asking back, "So, what are the Duke's orders?" The royal assassin sighed, "It's really something to see." Aitman was on the same page, but he couldn't help but worry that even for the world's strongest allied forces, entrusting the entire fleet to just one person seemed like a huge gamble. The royal assassin watched as Eugen used his magic. Water-based magic that is to control the warships, and added, because if he makes one wrong move, the whole fleet could be wiped out. It's a truly dangerous battle plan. Then he put on a show of comforting Aitman. No need to worry, though, because if the warships are destroyed, the blame won't fall. On your head. Aitman picked up on the hidden jab in the royal assassin's words. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked suspiciously. Beneath his mask, the royal assassin gave a knowing smile. He explained, "Because the people down below are lives that no one has to take responsibility for. Down in the soldiers' quarters aboard the warship, the men sitting there weren't exactly alive. They sat there like puppets, their faces completely blank, aside from the angry veins bulging on their skin. The soldiers all sat bolt upright in the exact same posture, not moving a muscle. Their eyes were lifeless, and drool trickled from their mouths. Their minds had also been slowly twisted, long since no longer human." Kim told the royal assassin, "Go take charge." Seeing the assassin's dazed look, he repeated himself, "I said, you go command those things downstairs. I work better alone." The startled assassin asked him, "Where are you going?" Kim coldly replied, "Recon." The royal assassin was baffled. "Shouldn't that be a job for the recon team, making me take command right?" "Off the bat is a bit..." Before he could finish, Kim had already zipped away. The assassin stood there stunned. His perfect escape plan was now completely ruined, all thanks to this guy. Meanwhile, Kim was soaring through the sky on a reconnaissance mission when suddenly he spotted a fellow with fox ears holding a scroll, walking and sighing, "So busy, so busy." Without a second thought, Kim swooped down and snatched the paper from his hand. He landed on a high tree branch to read its contents. A declaration of war from the Jijian Tin Kingdom. It's addressed to Sapfang. Where's that isn't the capital of the Beastkin Union? Sapfang. While he was absorbed in reading the letter, the tree suddenly toppled over. It was the fox from earlier who had sliced clean through the trunk in a single swipe. As the tree came crashing down, Kim quickly flew into the air. The fox mistook him for one of the bird folk and yelled furiously, "You scoundrel, who in the world are you? How dare you? Take my letter." The moment he finished speaking, Kim decisively lopped off his head. "Something must be going on over there. I have to see it for myself." In no time he arrived at Sapfang, the capital of the Beastkin Union. He looked down at the simple town below with utter disdain. This rat hole is the capital. What a surprise. And no one knows about this place because of the Beastkin's isolationist policy. There's even a cathedral here. I bet those clowns at the church don't know about this either. Kim's expression grew grim. We've all been played. Sapfang is a fake. Back with the royal assassin, he was sighing in frustration. How did things get to this point? He sat there thinking about his dream of a quiet retirement, maybe doing some fishing in about 50 years. He was certainly grateful to be making a salary of $2,000, but the work just kept piling up, which was really getting on his nerves. He was in a sour mood, afraid he was going to work himself into an early grave. Kim quickly brought the letter, back startling the royal assassin. "Lord Kim, you returned much sooner than I expected." Kim noticed his flustered demeanor and found it a bit odd. 8 men came over and asked him, "What's the enemy situation?" Kim told them Sap Fang is a trap. The real capital is somewhere else. Both of them were completely shocked. 8 men couldn't believe his ears. Impossible. The great cathedral of the Beastkin Union is in Sap Fang. There's no way a city that worships the goddess could possibly be a trap. Kim glared at the Wolfkin. "Didn't you say the leader of these scoundrels is a demon?" 8 men was at a loss for words. At that moment, the assassin chimed in. "He did say that. The demon clan worships the goddess as the creator god, but their devotion only goes so far. If it's them, they could abandon the great cathedral without a second thought." 8 men said he would change the plan. Kim asked if he would be changing the schedule for the entire operation as well. 8 men replied that it wasn't necessary. His hand, which was holding his pipe, trembled. "If those cowards had seen our warships and surrendered in fear, I might have let this whole thing end peacefully." Suddenly he threw his pipe to the ground and crushed it under his heel. His voice grew tight with rage. "But I can assure you, any peaceful intentions I had are long gone. How dare those fiends insult the goddess? I will cut those beastkin in half, gut them, and use them as fish bait. I will throw their bones to the wild beasts." Back in Sap Fang, a bearkin guard spotted a light in the sky like a brilliant star. "Is that a shooting star?" He immediately clasped his paws together and prayed, "Please let me work hard for little pay. Please let me work less for lots of pay." But when he opened his eyes, he realized it wasn't a shooting star at all. Instead, it was the end of his life. A massive fireball came screaming down, blowing up the entire town. 3 warships had descended on Sap Fang. Aitman stepped onto the ship's railing, his face contorted with rage, veins bulging. "You dare to insult the goddess, you heretical monsters!" He bellowed the order. "Turn everything except the great cathedral to dust." The crew members heard the order and immediately loaded the cannons, preparing to open fire. 8 men was still seething. "Die, you heretics, I'll kill." Every last one of you, Eugene standing nearby, felt like his eardrums were about to pop. So noisy. 2 hours later, all of Sap Fang, except for the cathedral, had been completely leveled. 8 men stood with his hands clasped, apologizing to the goddess. "Although they say the cathedral was not harmed, I regret that I had to. Please forgive me for disturbing the peace of the goddess's house." After owning up to his mistake, he picked up his hat and put it back on. Now that he thought about it, this was the first time he'd ever seen a church in a beastman's home. He'd heard that the goddess's image is different for each race, but this particular goddess seemed to be modeled after a specific person. Was there really a beastman so holy they'd have a statue carved in their honor? It doesn't really look like a beastman, though. Just then, Kim walked over. "What in the world is this? Why is this darn thing here?" 8 men asked him, "Do you recognize this face?" He answered, "I think I do. It's a face I haven't seen in a very long time." 8 men thought to himself, Sir Kim recognizes her. He knows this beastman. The more he thought about it, the more he realized she wasn't just any ordinary beastman. In fact, she didn't look much like a beastman at all. Could she be someone from the church? He was startled by the thought. If she was someone from the church who also knew Sir Kim, could she possibly be one of the companions who defeated the Demon King 8 men? Quickly turned back to ask, could this be the former Saintess? Kim stated flatly, "It's the Demon King." 8 men was absolutely stunned. "What did you just say?" 8 men was suddenly drenched in sweat. "Whoa, what did you just say?" "Did you say the Demon King?" He screamed, almost losing his mind. No, I have to bury it. These hands that prayed to the Demon King, my tongue, my eyes, I have to bury them all." Without a second thought, Kim chopped the back of his neck, knocking him out cold. If I hadn't stopped him, he probably would have killed himself. Just then, if a bishop walked over, Kim immediately grilled him. "You're the bishop here, right? What is this? Did the church authorize you to carve this statue?" Sweating bullets, he denied it. "No, sir. They approved a completely different statue, but the beastman here secretly changed it. Since I had no idea what the Demon King looked like, I just assumed it was a matter of the beastman's artistic taste." Kim pressed, "So this means the church doesn't know about this?" The bishop answered confidently, "I swear on my honor, I'll report this to the church right away." And with that, the bishop left. Kim knew Eidemann was awake, so he said, "You heard him, didn't you?" The bishop swore he'd report this to the church. 8 men pushed himself up, looking utterly tormented. "But Sir Kim, I prayed to the Demon King. That's an undeniable fact. I broke my vow to never pray to a false god." Kim clicked his tongue, thinking the guy was a total fanatic. 8 men started repeatedly slamming his head on the ground. "Oh, goddess, please punish this wretched sinner." Suddenly the bishop came rushing back, shouting frantically, "We have a huge problem. The Pope has declared a holy war." 8 men pronounced each word carefully. "A holy war? Did you just say a holy war?" The bishop hurriedly explained. "The Pope announced that he will not forgive the heretical actions of the beastmen." The fire for war in Adamant's heart was suddenly ignited, fiercely. "This is my chance to atone for my sins against the goddess. Just you wait, you wretched demons. A few days after the Holy War was declared, Safang was now just a desolate wasteland. When Jonhen and Inner arrived, they were totally blown away. I can't believe the G-Giant Canteen could build such a massive ship. Inner asked, annoyed. Didn't you get the report about this beforehand? Why? Are you so surprised? Jonhen blushed, scratching her head and laughing. Haha, well, seeing it in person is a totally different experience, but maybe my reaction was a little over the top. Inner just looked away, unconcerned. Whatever you say. She thought to herself, the holy knights in the church are in on this conspiracy too. I can't trust them. Jonhen recognized Kim the moment she saw him, but she reminded herself not to acknowledge her master. Seeing Inner step forward, she quickly warned, Saintess in training, you need to control yourself. To her surprise, Inner told Kim they were there to support the Holy War. Jonhen was a little surprised. Doesn't she remember? Kim stared at the two of them. So you're the support sent by the church. One of you is a Saintess from the church, and the other is a monster like me. Before this war is over, I'll have to get rid of one of you. Inner asked Kim about the current status of the battle. Just then, the royal assassin stepped forward. I can brief you. We've been trying to pinpoint the real capital of the Beastmen Federation. As a result, we found a few of the most likely cities. The plan is to split our forces and attack those cities. We're hoping this will help us narrow down which city is the most likely target. Jonhen immediately asked where. The assassin handed them a piece of paper. Here's the plan and the location. The commercial capital of the Beastmen Jiaoi. Meanwhile, over at the Beastmen Federation in Furlan, the commercial capital of Jiaoi was an incredibly developed and modern city. A lion slammed his fist on the table in anger. That's impossible. Safang fell in just a few days, and not only that, but the church has declared a holy war. The hippo explained it was because someone had recognized the statue of the Demon King. The lion got even more furious, demanding to know why the hippo had carved the Demon King's face onto it. The hippo shot back, no one knew what she looked like. Besides, that was your predecessor's doing, not mine. The boar cut in, stopping the other two. This isn't the time to be blaming each other. So does this mean we can expect the Demon King to join this war? The deer panicked. Then does that mean the commander of the attack is either the king of the G-Giant Canteen or that infamous Sir Kim, the one who terrorized Stackfit, the rumored demon who turned the Flashfield Plains into a sea of flames is right here. They quickly tried to calm each other down. This is no time to be afraid. We must figure out a way to handle this. Meanwhile, Kim and his crew were already lying in wait outside. He had a feeling this would be a piece of cake. The royal assassin asked him, Are you referring to the city assault? Kim replied coolly, I'm referring to their plan to leave no survivors. The remaining assassin was sweating bullets as he asked about Kim's strategy. Kim explained that he would serve as a decoy when the church entered the city while the assassin would gather the materials and prepare, as the king had instructed. Kim announced to everyone, All right, let's begin. With that, he leaped into the air and transformed into a monster. The beastmen were utterly horrified at the sight. It was the enemy. One of them immediately launched a spear toward Kim. Although he dodged it, the spear still grazed his snout. The one who missed cursed, Darn it, I almost got its eye. Kim looked over at him. Oh, really, I suppose I can play along for a bit. He opened his mouth, preparing to unleash his dragon breath, when suddenly a massive blow sent his head flying. Kim glanced back and saw the person standing there was Inner. He asked who she was. Inner screamed, You think I've forgotten the enemy of my brother, you monster. Kim, in his massive dragon form, was clenching the spear in his jaws. He slowly pulled it out as drops of blood trickled down. Kim's entire body was larger and taller than the fortress before him. He lifted his gaze to the person standing on top. The plan had changed a little. That person was Inner. She was radiating an intense hatred with a large weapon launcher beside her. Her eyes were sharp and determined, ready to send Kim to his grave. Aner decisively fired the machine, launching a spear. It pierced straight through Kim's shoulder, and just as he was about to regenerate the flesh, another spear flew out and stabbed him right in the eye, causing him to stumble backward. This was no ordinary spear. It was imbued with a different kind of power. Up on the fortress, Inner immediately activated all of her magical power, unleashing it completely. The spear in Kim's eye instantly exploded with incredible destructive force. Seeing that the enemy had collapsed and wasn't moving, Inner finally stopped. Tears of hatred and resentment streamed from her eyes. Inner had finally gotten her revenge. Her brother could finally rest in peace. She turned away thinking it was all over, but Kim was already standing firm. His neck was regenerating piece by piece. The flesh and bone rapidly reformed, and on top of that, a whole new head grew in its place. Kim spread his wings and soared high into the sky. A terrifying voice rang out, causing Inner to freeze in place. She glanced behind her at Kim. She had blown his head clean off, so how was he still alive? Kim looked absolutely nightmarish now. He found her magic enhancement skill quite interesting and wanted Inner to show him a few more tricks. Elsewhere, a chaotic battle was raging. Jonhen was hiding around a corner. She noticed the guards were incredibly lax and wondered where the Saintess candidate was. They were supposed to have met here. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the sky. Jonhen looked up to see that it was Kim and Aner fighting high above. It was a one-on-one duel, and they were evenly matched, neither one willing to give an inch. Jonhen was in shock. Why were her master and the Saintess candidate fighting? At that very moment, Kim took a direct hit from Ener, who was also unleashing a ferocious power from within. Her physical enhancement skill activated. Ener aimed directly for Kim's wing, the power of her attack at least 10 times greater than usual, a fact made clear by his pained scream. She grabbed the wing and mercilessly ripped it in two. This sight was truly horrifying. Helpless from the pain, Kim could only watch as his wing was torn from his body. The people in the chaos on the ground couldn't help but look up, having no idea why the two of them were fighting. Drops of blood rained down from Kim, creating a literal blood shower. The citizens murmured to each other, terrified by the spectacle. They all panicked and scattered in every direction, paying no attention to the two figures still trying to tear each other apart. Ener delivered a devastating punch, hitting Kim squarely. He was unable to block the attack and crashed to the ground, shattering the street below. But Ener didn't stop there. Full of killing intent, she dove straight down with the speed of lightning so fast that a normal person couldn't even track her movements. Yet with a single flick of his dragon tail, Kim sent Ener crashing through walls for thousands of feet. With just that one hit, she was left collapsed in a pile of rubble. Kim was a complete monster, and with no other option. Ener resorted to using something forbidden by the church from before she became a saintess. She activated it, and a vibrant blue flame erupted from her hand. Her other hand did the same, and her entire body seemed to fill with a newfound power. On her slender, beautiful legs, Ener struggled back to her feet. The power she had just activated was a weapon exclusive to the saintess. In spite of this, Kim showed no fear. In her quest to avenge that soldier, she was unknowingly providing him with some amusement. With a terrifying look, Kim said he would be sure to reward Ener for her efforts. Filled with rage, Ener charged at Kim once more, vowing to kill him before he could make a move. She poured all of her strength and skill into this attack, convinced she had finally defeated Kim. However, Ener was in for another surprise. Kim's face transformed into that of a red-haired woman, and with a single hand, he effortlessly blocked Ener's attack. This left her in absolute shock. She thought Kim had turned into a woman just to mess with her head, which meant Ener didn't recognize this face. He clenched his fist. This isn't a mental attack. Then he swung his arm right toward her. Following his swing, a massive explosion erupted, echoing throughout the area. Kim had struck Ener's body directly. Through the thick smoke and dust, he stood there like a statue, his face a complete blank. The whole scene was being watched by John Hen from a distance. She froze on the spot because the face Kim was wearing now belonged to the previous saintess. Kim just stood there, completely expressionless in the smoke and dust. John Hen realized her master had turned into Angela. She couldn't figure out how a shapeshifter could even do that. Trying to get a grip, John Hen just couldn't wrap her head around it. She thought Kim only claimed to be a shapeshifter to trick people. His real power was actually to gain the abilities of whatever creatures he ate, which meant Kim must have eaten the previous saintess. The very idea sent a shiver down John Hen's spine. She trembled, thinking that you could become a saintess just by eating one. Meanwhile, Ener was in really bad shape, seriously hurt. Pinned down in the rubble, she couldn't move an inch, but she was definitely still alive. Kim glanced over at her, seeming impressed with the church's tech. He raised his hand about to finish Ener off for good when suddenly John Hen's voice rang out, "Stop!" John Hen leaped in front of him, blocking his path. Even though she was a holy knight, she wasn't about to just stand by and let him eat his prey. Kim immediately denied it, saying that wasn't what he was doing at all, but John Hen found Kim's expression completely unconvincing. At that moment, John Hen's own face was starting to look strange too. Two bright red horns sprouted from her head and veins started bulging on her skin. John Hen desperately tried to calm herself down, making her horns shrink as she muttered that it wasn't true. Kim, standing across from her, still half looking like Angela, figured she was scared of her true nature. She knew what she was, but just couldn't control the impulse. John Hen shot back that she was nothing like a monster. Like him, she was a holy knight. A small smile played on Kim's lips. Then he simply turned and walked away, deciding this was fine for now. Kim had changed his mind, letting John Hen decide for herself what to do about Ener. After all, in her current state, she wasn't going to get in the way of his plans. John Hen knew she needed to report this immediately. She made an urgent call reporting that the Saintess candidate was gravely injured and that she would be returning right away. Elsewhere behind some windows, a few shadowy figures were watching the whole thing unfold. They were all huddled together trying to get a better look, unsure of what was happening outside. From what they could see, the entire city was in ruins. At that exact moment, a figure appeared right behind them. It was a royal assassin, his face completely hidden by a hood. He raised his weapon and commented that the king of the Furlan Kingdom, the one responsible for all this, must have killed a lot of beastmen. As they were wondering who this guy was, they suddenly screamed in terror. In an instant, the window was splattered with blood. Over at the city hall, a huge crowd of citizens had gathered around to listen to the second prince's speech. He announced their victory over the Beastmen Federation, and that the demon ruling the city had been eliminated. The city was finally free and back to normal. He promised that those who helped in the war would be rewarded. Then Hyponic declared loudly, "We are victorious! The crowd erupted in cheers. Behind him, the hooded royal assassin complimented Hyponic on his great speech. Hyponic then used the moment to congratulate him, calling him Joachim C. Casio. Joachim had no idea why he would use his real name. Hyponic just patted his shoulder, saying Kim had told him all about his amazing work and how he was the one who led the army. Suddenly, Hyponic's voice turned serious as he whispered, Joachim is no longer a loyal assassin. You know far too much. With that, he reached out and pulled down Joachim's mask, announcing to everyone, from now on, you are a major general of the G Kingdom. The people need a hero to believe in. Then Hyponic walked off, wishing him well in his future endeavors and leaving the man completely stunned. Kim also popped up, patting his shoulder and remarking that he'd finally made it big before leaving, just like Hyponic. Joachim was left all alone and confused, his eyes welling up with tears, not sure what to do now that his plans were ruined. Meanwhile, in another dark room, Inner Toy Top was tied to a table, her injuries looking even worse than before. A recording started to play. An unforeseen accident has occurred during the creation process of the Saintess. Risk level has tripled. Top secret information may have been leaked. Therefore, it is necessary to combine chains A and B to complete the task quickly. Approval from the relevant authorities is required. Inner was slowly opening her eyes when an older man began to speak, calling her name and asking if she could hear him. He said he'd gotten a report about the incident and had a proposal for her. The man's expression turned sinister as a sly smile spread across his face. He proposed that Inner should become a monster. Meanwhile, Kim was chilling out in a room thinking about the dragons and monsters in the great forest that got super powerful by combining the physical abilities of the creatures they ate. That was basically how his own power worked too. He was also wondering why he seemed to have hit his growth limit. At this point, Kim couldn't get any stronger unless he ate beings with transcendent powers. That's why he was debating whether or not he should use the goddess's wish. When he'd transformed into the Saintess, Kim realized an orc's physical strength was actually better than a Saintess's own physical strength. But the Saintess's healing ability was much stronger and more efficient. In that case, what if he were to combine the Saintess's body with a dragon's body? Now that sounded interesting and definitely worth a try. Just then, Joachim came into the room to talk with Kim. As he did, blood was dripping from his mangled hand. Kim turned his own blood-covered face to look over at Joachim. He seemed a little frightened, wondering if something was amiss. Kim had never seen Joachim in that type of uniform before. Joachim then explained that he had to wear clothes befitting his rank. He also handed Kim a newspaper. Kim glanced at it, even though he wasn't particularly interested in politics, but he couldn't hide his surprise. The newspaper was reporting the death of Holy Knight Paladin Pitt, the only disciple of the Protector Gan Canteen. We're now at the offices of the Daily Elmod, the most prestigious publisher in the GZ Canteen Kingdom, where reporter Felina Gizen-Smid was conducting an interview. She sat with a notebook and quill in hand, asking the young woman across from her if she was on the boat during the incident. The woman, Kendra Ambercare, confirmed she was. She explained that she was in charge of the flagship's drinking water during the battle with Fawn, and had previously been assigned to help the Lord. Protector of Pochu, get around. Felina scribbled down every word, a joyful expression on her face, as she thought to herself, what a fantastic exclusive. Having traded poetry for journalism, Felina was now known as a dynamic, famous, and trustworthy reporter. Felina pressed for more details, asking Kendra to elaborate, since being an officer of drinking water wasn't exactly a common role. Just then, the office door swung open and a gaunt-faced man stepped inside. Neither of the women recognized him. "We're in the middle of an interview," Felina said politely. "Who are you?" The man replied that he was looking for Felina Gizen-Smid, which took her by surprise. After a moment, she confirmed it was her. "That's me." "How fortunate," he replied. As he spoke, cracks started a spiderweb across his face. Saliva dribbled from his mouth onto the floor. The bizarre sight terrified both women, but their fear quickly morphed into pure shock as the stranger's face was replaced by Kim's. "Sir Kim!" They gasped in disbelief. Kim paid their reactions, no mind, and got straight to the point. He was there to ask about Holy Knight Pitt's death, and he made it clear her cooperation wasn't optional. A wave of intimidating energy rolled off him, pressing down on Felina and Kendra. Felina found herself backing away until she hit the glass wall, her professional composure completely gone. A sense of dread and panic washed over her. Of all people, why did it have to be him again? Elsewhere, Kim is seen poring over a massive stack of documents. It's an official announcement from the Holy Temple. The continent's protector, Xian's only disciple, Holy Knight Pitt, died in the Holy War. Behind him, a visibly nervous Felina was being perfectly cooperative, clearly not wanting to get on his bad side. Kim turned to ask, "Did the Holy Temple officially declare Pitt deceased?" Felina confirmed she was quite sure, explaining that Holy Knights are often listed as deceased when they go missing. But Kim was adamant that Pitt was alive. Besides, it would take a long time for the Holy Temple to give up on someone so important. Kim was sure they were up to something. H panic after reviewing the documents. Agreed with him. "This is definitely suspicious." But then he dramatically collapsed onto his desk, wailing, "But I'm "So sorry, brother. I'm just too swamped to help." Looking like a man who had pulled 7 all-nighters in a row, Tanik complained that it wasn't just 1 or 2 things. The paperwork from war preparations was absolutely burying him. "How can I possibly get through all this by myself?" he pleaded. He then suggested, "Why don't we just let this one go? Since it's an internal holy temple affair, it's nearly impossible for us to figure out anyway." But Kim was not having it, his eyes now carrying. A sharp glint locked onto H-Panic. "If you're that busy, the next phase of our plan will be seriously delayed." Terrified by Kim's tone, H-Panic broke out in a cold sweat. But just as quickly Kim turned to leave. "Forget it, I'll handle it myself. Besides, there's something I've been wanting to try out on the ocean anyway." Cut to a white sailboat slicing through the waves. On deck, a black lizardman stood with his arms crossed, enjoying the sea breeze. And of course, that's our protagonist, Kim. He's headed for the Rutmus Alliance, the land of the lizardmen. Flying would have been faster, but that would also be like sending out a global announcement that Jijian Canteen's protector was back. So Kim opted for a different, if more time-consuming approach. Just as he started to relax, a pirate ship with black sails came bearing down on them at a frantic pace. The other passengers began to panic, shouting, "Pirates!" The pirate captain, looking every bit the part, bellowed, "You ugly scum," followed by a hearty laugh that screamed, "Final boss!" But before he could even finish his demands for their valuables, the entire pirate ship was instantly vaporized in a flash of fire, leaving nothing but ash. The passengers on the sailboat could only stare in stunned silence. They turned to see Kim's smoke still curling from his open mouth. A single thought popped into everyone's head: a lizard man can do that. Arriving at Smutport in the Rutmus Alliance, Kim took in the sights. He was amazed to see the place was packed with all kinds of lizardmen. One burly lizardman even had a shorter one riding on his head. There was another with ears like fish fins, and even a 4-legged crocodile-like lizardman carrying luggage for its master. Compared to Deslam, where every lizardman looked identical, the diversity here was incredible. Kim decided his first step should be to gather some information. The lizardmen's king had never been seen in public, and with so little to go on, Kim wasn't sure where to begin. He found a spot atop a clock tower overlooking the sea and prepared to make his move. 1 week. A little later, over at the mayor's office in Smutport, the mayor was so furious you could see the veins popping on his forehead. He slammed the report down on his desk and yelled, "5 villages wiped out in just 1 week. Have we identified this monster yet?" His assistant, sweating bullets, replied, "Yes and no, sir. None of the witness testimonies about its appearance seem to match. So we're clueless about what it looks like. However, I've pinpointed where it's likely to appear next." The assistant unfurled a map and explained, "It appears to be heading through the Quetlon mine." The mayor ordered immediately issue an evacuation order for the mining area and send in the adventurers. And what's more, I want only the most elite. A while later, at the Rutmat Quetlon mine, a squad of lizardmen was on the move. An archer turned back to remind them all that their opponent was a savage beast that wouldn't even leave their bones behind. He barely got halfway through his sentence when a shark leaped out and swallowed him whole. How could there possibly be a shark in a wetland? The others cried out in horrified disbelief. A short lizardman mage held up his staff and sketched out a magic circle. A stone pillar suddenly shot up from below, launching the shark high into the air, and flying along with it was the unfortunate victim's arm. The shark was flung into the sky by the stone pillar, the poor victim's arm still in its mouth. "It's that monster," one lizardman screamed in a panic. A comrade beside him urged him to calm down, saying it can't move very well. In the air, he took an iron spear and hurled it straight into the sky, aiming right for the shark. Suddenly, on the shark's body, numerous fin-like appendages and a pair of ears that looked just like the lizard man it had swallowed began to sprout. The spear was useless, as the shark simply twisted its body to dodge it. The one who threw the spear was also stunned by its movements, exclaiming, "No way, a shark can't fly." Meanwhile, the shark was now trying to get back to the water. The short lizardman mage raised his staff high. "Stone platform." A stone surface materialized right where the shark was about to land. Its head slammed hard into the stone platform and got stuck, immobilizing it. 2 lizardmen holding weapons charged forward. Slash. The beast's body was sliced clean in 2. "We did it," a lizardman sighed with relief. But it's never that simple. 2 new shark heads appeared out of nowhere and bit off the heads of the 2 attacking lizardmen. While the entire squad was frozen in shock at the sight, a 2-headed shark burst out of the water and devoured them all. Blood splattered everywhere. A long while later, Kim appeared out of thin air, carrying the shark's severed head to the mayor's office. Kim, still in his lizardman disguise, brought the shark's head to present to the mayor. The mayor asked in utter astonishment, "What is this?" Kim spun a story saying he found it in Quetlon and that it was the infamous monster from the reports. "Unfortunately, there were a few adventurers' bodies next to it," Kim continued. The mayor had no reason to be suspicious and thanked Kim for salvaging the adventurers' honor. Otherwise, no one would have known they were the ones who killed the monster. The mayor then asked if Kim wanted any kind of reward, saying he would do his absolute best to provide it. Kim said he wanted the map on the table, and the mayor gladly agreed. At the top of a tower, Kim unfolded the map to look at it while thinking back on the events of the last few days. It turned out he was the one who had been eating the lizard men while attacking the villages. However, after all that, Kim still hadn't found any information about the lizard men's leader. But Kim did notice one thing: the population of lizard men was maintained at a balanced ratio in each village. This distribution was very peculiar, but he found no reason for it in the lizard men's memories. Suddenly, Kim thought of the red lizard man he had met before. He had introduced himself as being from the Dragon Ute tribe, but Kim had never seen that species around here. Kim speculated that the Dragon Ute tribe might be connected to the Lizard King and decided to check it out. As the mayor was reviewing documents, the door to his office burst open. Who dares enter without knocking? But then Kim's silhouette stood before him. Kim asked bluntly, "Do you know anything about the Dragon Ute tribe?" The mayor's face instantly turned pale. His body trembled as beads of sweat dripped down. I don't know. I'm very busy. You should leave." The mayor stammered, trying to change the subject and avoid the question. Kim leaned in close to him. Usually when people talk about something they don't know, their first response is, "What's that?" The mayor tried to play along. "That's right. What's the Dragon Ute tribe? I've never heard of it." But Kim had no patience for his act. His hand shot straight toward the mayor's head, his eyes filled with killing intent. "I'll just find the answer in your head myself." As dusk fell, the mayor went into his house, put on his nightgown, and collapsed onto the bed with a sigh of relief. "My head feels like it's going to explode because of all the recent incidents. The monster attack and that adventurer searching for the Dragon Ute tribe of the mayor lamented. The mayor then unconsciously muttered, "Should I ask him what to do about that guy in the daily report?" "Enough." Suddenly the mayor stopped himself. "What did I just say?" The mayor wondered, then suddenly let out a tragic scream. "Who are you? My body, what's happening?" A moment later, the person in the nightgown lying on the bed was no longer the mayor, but Kim. He thought about the him the mayor had mentioned. It could be the very one he was looking for, down at a sewer drain. Kim used the mayor's body to slip through the barrier. Inside, he found the communication device the mayor had been using to communicate with that mysterious person. The space was pitch black, impossible for a normal lizard man to see in, but Kim had dragon eyes. "Why don't you just give up?" he taunted. "Do you think you're the only one who can see everything?" The moment the words left his mouth, a massive, horned and winged shadow materialized, its eyes glaring fiercely in the darkness. Despite facing this colossal shadow, Kim showed no fear, his voice ringing out, "Come on out." First, a pair of enormous legs emerged, followed by the head of a dragon covered in rough armored skin and sharp spikes. The creature stepped fully into view, fixing Kim with a majestic yet furious gaze. But Kim seemed to be thinking about something else entirely. "So this wall is just a magical illusion," Kim realized. The dragon's voice boomed with arrogance. "Know your place, you lowly mortal." It continued, "The only reason I've remained chained behind that foolish seal of your house is because you've been so diligent in your role as a guardian of the gate." Kim frowned. "It's that person again." The mayor had never revealed who he was talking to, but if it was this dragon, maybe, he could finally get an answer. Kim's body trembled slightly as he transformed into a red lizard man. The dragon eyed him suspiciously. "Who are you? How can someone without a drop of dragon lineage have such potent dragon blood flowing through their veins?" Kim raised a claw. "That's because I've eaten plenty of your kind." "What do you mean?" A mysterious voice suddenly echoed from the communication device. The massive dragon immediately prostrated itself. "My master, an intruder with mixed dragon blood, has invaded this place." "Wait, he has dragon blood," the voice mused. "Has the time finally come?" The voice spoke once more. "I command you not to attack. Bring him to me as my guest." The dragon immediately complied respectfully, motioning for Kim to follow it up a long, winding staircase. As Kim walked behind the creature, he figured the master it mentioned must be the leader of all these lizard men. They arrived at a large door which the dragon opened by pulling a lever. As it slowly swung open, it revealed a stunning scene inside. A vast green meadow with sharp claw-like pillars jutting from the ground, and high in the sky a sun was shining brightly. "Wait, isn't this place underground? How can there be a sun?" Kim wondered, completely baffled. "This is an artificial sun," a well-dressed man explained, appearing as if from nowhere. "Its diameter is 18 meters and it weighs about 43.4 tons. It's the world's smallest and lightest nuclear fusion device, with just one energy source. Like this, we can power all the underground workshops." So the man turned to face him fully. "I welcome you to my kingdom, guest from the Holy Kingdom. I am the ancient dragon, the very first dragon created by the hands of the goddess." He introduced himself. Kim finally understood who he was facing, and apparently this ancient dragon thought Kim was some kind of envoy. "I have a question," Kim started, but the ancient dragon cut him off. "Of course you must have many questions, but let's save them until after you've told me what you feel from this place." Kim thought to himself, if the first dragon is calling me a friend, does that make me a manticore or something? It was clear the ancient dragon had mistaken him for a devout paladin. "We have a very deep connection with the Holy Kingdom," the ancient dragon continued. "The legendary paladin Viba is one of the trusted agents I sent to support the Holy Kingdom." The ancient dragon studied Kim. "You're not as surprised as I expected, are you?" He looked away. "The Holy Kingdom must have taught you far more than I realized, considering they sent someone with such high security clearance. It seems you're in quite a hurry." Realizing he might have said too much, the ancient dragon decided to allow Kim to ask one question before they reached their destination. Kim didn't hesitate. "Do you know if the original pet shop came to this world?" The ancient dragon confirmed that he knew of it, asking if that was the reason for Kim's visit. He added that all lizardmen and dragonoids are born from his own essence, so every experience the dragon race has is transmitted back to him. "Furthermore, one of the dragonoids I sent to the human world has already reported to me about you," the ancient dragon said, distractedly failing to notice the sharp jaws opening right behind his back. Chomp! Fresh blood sprayed through the air. The ancient dragon reacted instantly, his other arm transforming into a massive claw and lunging at Kim, but it was too late. Kim had already leaped back, the ancient dragon's severed right arm clamped in his mouth. "What are you doing?" The ancient dragon's face contorted with fury. "It seems you still don't understand the situation, do you?" Kim said casually, chewing and swallowing the arm. "Are you betraying me, you greedy mortals? Do you have any idea how kind I've been to the Holy Kingdom?" The ancient dragon roared, but Kim just mocked him. "First dragon, a celestial being, and yet so foolish. When did I ever say I was from the Holy Kingdom?" Kim taunted as he gradually reverted to his true form. The ancient dragon froze, startled by Kim's true appearance. He had seen this face before through the eyes of Vomino, and the memory came flooding back. The first time he'd laid eyes on Kim, he saw a face with menacing, flashing red eyes. Comparing that memory to the man before him now, the ancient dragon came to a shocking realization. The original pet. In a flash, Kim teleported directly in front of him. A fist attached to an arm that looked suspiciously like the ancient dragon's own came flying toward his face. Completely startled, the ancient dragon broke into a cold sweat and shrieked, "Hey, that's my arm!" The punch sent him flying 100 meters away, but thankfully he wasn't injured. He then shifted into his massive dragon form, roaring furiously, "There's no way I'm letting you walk out of here alive!" Blue energy crackled in his mouth, gathering with a force so great it made the very ground tremble. He thought to himself, "No matter what happens, you're going to die right here." Meanwhile, a young woman with dark hair and pointed ears looked around worriedly. "Is this an earthquake?" she wondered. The ancient dragon, however, was busy opening his jaws wide, a blue magic circle forming as he prepared to annihilate Kim, who simply stood there waiting. Suddenly, Kim noticed the surrounding towers were also beginning to glow, each forming a yellow magic circle. A moment later, they all unleashed beams of light that exploded right where Kim was standing. When the smoke and fire cleared, he had transformed into his fire dragon form, and his wings were badly damaged from shielding himself. It was then he had the brilliant insight that these towers were probably designed for attacks. Since this was the ancient dragon's home turf, he was at a clear disadvantage. Kim unfurled his wings, which had already healed, at an incredible speed. He then glanced up, spotted a single star in the cavern's sky, and soared upwards towards it, ignoring the ancient dragon's utter confusion. Roaring in frustration, the dragon refused to let Kim escape, and poured more power into the towers, which fired another volley of light beams in pursuit. However, Kim dodged every single blast with perfect grace. He was even a little surprised by his own amazing evasion skills, realizing he must be using the Saintess's natural agility, which had adapted to his own body, explaining the incredible speed boost. Seeing his attacks were useless, the ancient dragon resorted to trash talking. "This is my house. You can't run if I don't let you." But his boasting stopped when he saw where Kim was headed. Straight for the world's lightest room-temperature nuclear fusion device, a machine with a diameter of only 18 meters and weighing in at 43.4 tons. This single device powered the entire underground facility, and the ancient dragon began to panic, roaring loudly in an attempt to stop him. Because if it explodes before he could finish, the fiery dragon had already slammed into the fusion reactor, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Following a massive explosion, the artificial sky went dark. As the star plummeted toward the ground, the ancient dragon let out a horrified scream. He shot upwards desperately, trying to stop the core from falling, but before he could even get close, Kim had grabbed him by the tail. The ancient dragon glared back at him, his eyes full of pure resentment. Before he could spit out an insult, the core fell and impaled itself on the sharp spire of a tower. Instantly, a cataclysmic explosion engulfed both dragons, and only the desperate echoing scream of the ancient dragon remained. Over at Smootdock Anner was trying to find a shop she'd been sent to, when a violent tremor suddenly rocked the area, shocking her. She thought it was just an earthquake, but a moment later, a blazing red heat wave washed over her, erupting from deep below the ground, right in the middle of the city. In the blink of an eye, a gigantic crater-like hole had been carved out of the cityscape. High in the sky, the faint figures of two dragons, one large and one small, could be seen. The ancient dragon was battered and bruised, even having lost his right arm. Kim was also in rough shape, though he looked slightly better off. He wondered if that blast had actually been strong enough to pierce his dragon scales. He figured the old dragon only survived thanks to some kind of super regeneration. The ancient dragon, meanwhile, angrily blamed Kim for absolutely everything. Kim shot back a witty retort, making fun of the ancient dragon's childish temper tantrum. As you can imagine, this only enraged him further. He roared, raised his one remaining claw, and lunged at Kim. In an instant, the two of them clashed. The ancient dragon was injured, but he was far from beaten. He was still able to relentlessly hammer Kim with his single arm. The sheer power behind the blows made Kim suspicious. Far below, Inner looked up in utter disbelief, watching the terrifying brawl unfold. Up above, Kim had finally gained the upper hand and had the ancient dragon by the throat. He growled, demanding to know who the dragon truly was, because his strength fell off, and he showed no real combat experience at all. The ancient dragon struggled, explaining he'd used up all his magic to block the explosion. He then threatened that, if he still had his magic power, Kim would be toast. He couldn't finish his sentence before he started choking, begging for air. But it wasn't going to be that easy. Kim had no reason to let him go. Hearing this, the ancient dragon desperately tried to bargain for his life with his trove of ancient knowledge. He asked if Kim would be interested in such secrets. Then he very nervously asked if Kim was planning on eating his entire body in one go. Not surprisingly, a dangerous glint appeared in Kim's eyes because he absolutely intended to help himself to all that wonderful knowledge. At that, an image of a manticore flashed in the ancient dragon's mind. He panicked, realizing Kim must have somehow copied the memories of his deceased friend. Finally, the ancient dragon grit his teeth and made a decision. He summoned a purple magic circle and began to laugh maniacally. Kim was confused by this. It seemed the dragon was determined to take him down with him, so instead of letting Kim take his knowledge, he chose to destroy it. Immediately, the horn on the ancient dragon's head shattered its contents, splattering everywhere. At that exact moment, Kim moved in to finish him off, but it was too late. Darn it, he cursed inwardly. The now headless body of the ancient dragon fell to the ground, and Kim followed after it. He landed right beside the body holding the dragon's severed head. His objective was complete, and although he felt a bit embarrassed about how messy it was, he also had gathered all the heads he needed. His collection of large and small trophies filled the shelves, and now joining them on the ground was the head of an ancient dragon. Rivers of ketchup stained the floor, leaving Panis completely speechless at the scene. Kim casually remarked that they probably should have gotten a bigger shelf. Panis accidentally steps in the mess and grumbles, "This one's head is way too big." Kim just shrugs. "Hey, not my fault." Panis decides to table the discussion, saying they've collected all the severed heads they need. He declares, "Now's the time to face the Holy See." You might think that's the next step, but it turns out there's something more pressing to do. First, I'm getting married, Panis announces, looking straight at Kim. And so 1 week before King Edward Panis' wedding, we find Panis admiring himself in his bedroom mirror. He turns to Kim and asks, "Since you've been married before, what's your take on it?" Kim's response is blunt. "Don't do it." A confused Panis asks, "What? Why is being married really that awful?" Kim simply states nothing ever goes according to plan. His eyes suddenly go wide as he continues. For instance, just when you're settling into a happy, normal life, some supernatural force will show up out of nowhere and murder your wife. Then those same monsters will kidnap your children and you'll never see them again. It's clear he's reliving a painful memory involving his own family. He finishes with a dark warning. If you're prepared to handle that, by all means, get married. Panis starts to break out in a cold sweat. He stammers, "Hey, just to be sure, you're not serious, right?" Kim's grim expression vanishes as he laughs. "Of course I'm kidding. So who are you? Marrying anyway?" Panis breathes a sigh of relief, thinking that was way too close. Picturing his fiancée, he answers, "The princess of the neighboring kingdom. She's a woman of incredible talent and beauty. Plus, her kingdom has a long, storied history, so this marriage will be a great way to solidify my power base. Oh, and by the way, I'm arranging for you to have a body double at the wedding." Kim immediately picks up on this, asking, "What are you plotting?" Panis lets out a laugh. "Haha, you catch on fast. In reality, consolidating power is just a minor detail. My true goal is to use the wedding as bait to lure the tiger out of the mountains and deliver a devastating blow to the Holy See." A cunning smile spreads across Panis' face. On the day of the wedding, Panis stands at the altar dressed in his full ceremonial robes. He glances out at the assembled guests, and Joaquin gives him a subtle nod from the pews. Panis then begins his speech. "I want to extend my sincerest thanks to all the distinguished guests from the various kingdoms who have traveled to attend my wedding today. There's an old saying that everyone is the hero of their own story. To be perfectly frank, that's a load of nonsense." Panis' lips curl into a twisted grin. A wave of murmurs ripples through the guests. What did I hear him correctly? Panis continues, "You're all probably thinking something like this. I'm a very important figure in this empire. You live in a constant delusion about your own power and significance. When in reality, you're nothing but parasites feeding off others. I'll admit, sometimes I fall into that trap myself." Down below, the crowd is utterly terrified and silent, breaking out in a sweat as they listen. And when it comes to trash swapping, one piece for another doesn't change anything. It drives me absolutely crazy whenever I see you garbage, parading around as if you were kings. Just then, weapons are drawn throughout the hall. They're drawn by soldiers secretly created by Panis. The king's voice rings out again. That's why this time I'm going to make a real change. Unable to stand it any longer, a guest leaps to his feet and shouts, "What is this blasphemy? You may be the king, but you can't spew such vile words." But before he can even finish his sentence, a spray of ketchup erupts from his neck. The man collapses, his head and body now in two separate places, and screams fill the air. In an instant, Panis's soldiers dispatch everyone in the room. Ketchup is splattered across every surface. A terrified cardinal, Santo Amore, cries out, "What is the meaning of this?" Another cardinal points at the king, yelling, "King Edward, what in the world are you doing? Do you not fear heavenly retribution?" With a sharp crack, he bites down on a hidden device in his mouth. His eyes begin to glow as he silently curses, "You madman, I'll show you the true power of heavenly punishment. It's the Holy See's secret weapon." A brilliant beam of light shoots from his eyes, heading straight for Panis's chest. At that very moment, over at the Santo Amore Cathedral, a majestic and magnificent white castle stands tall. A lone guard lets out a big yawn. "I guess, with everyone at the king's wedding, it's bound to be quiet around here." Just then he spots something approaching in the distance. The soldiers squint, seeing a figure crawling towards them. He calls out, "What is that dog?" No, wait, that's a monster. Before them is a beast on all fours, its long mane flowing as it bares a set of vicious teeth. A veteran guard scoffs, "A monster in the city center? Stay sharp, rookie. A monster like that is nothing we can't handle." But before he can finish his boast, ketchup splatters the air. There were 2 soldiers, but now there's only 1.5 of them left. The remaining guard screams, "Enemy attack!" A tail whips out, wrapping tightly around his neck. He's dragged away, screaming, into the shadows. More ketchup sprays out. A mouth full of razor-sharp teeth chews loudly before swallowing with a satisfying gulp. We see it's Kim, who thinks to himself, still hungry. You see, Kim's ability has a limit. Its power is directly proportional to the amount of food he's eaten. If Kim eats a lot, he can use his powers more freely. For example, if Kim were to eat a dragon, his internal storage space would then contain that dragon, allowing him to manifest a dragon's arm at will. However, if Kim were to lose that materialized arm in a fight, he can't bring that part back because the biomass has been expended from his storage space. He'd have to find and eat another dragon's arm to be able to use it again. Luckily, Kim found a clever workaround for this problem by consuming a troll and gaining its super regeneration ability. Thanks to that, his dragon arm can grow back even without needing to eat a second one. As long as even a tiny piece of flesh and bone is left, he can fully restore the limb. However, during his last major battle, Kim used up far too much of his own flesh and blood. The resulting explosion was massive. Now Kim recalls the ancient dragon and thinks of all thanks to a certain troublemaker who just had to blow up the artificial sun. The commotion brought soldiers running, who immediately started asking about the noise. What was that noise, a monster? How did it get in here? They wondered, standing near Kim with their weapons drawn. Kim figured this was a perfect opportunity to grab a snack. He lunged forward and snagged a soldier. A splash of ketchup and a scream filled the air, along with a flying arm, which Kim promptly caught in his mouth. After making a bit of a ketchup mess on the floor, Kim felt a little more satisfied. He then casually strolled inside, stopping in front of an open doorway. It was time, he thought, to get down to business. Kim poked one leg through the doorway, but with a swish, his own leg flew right past his face, hovering for a moment in midair. He could just make out the silhouette of someone holding a sword inside. A second later, Kim's leg hit the ground with a wet splat. Kim stood there facing the soldier, his severed leg lying on the floor between them. He glanced down at the wound as the soldier pointed a sword at him and said, "Get lost. This is no place for monsters like you." Kim looked at the swordsman, his eyes watering a bit, and thought that for them to have a paladin on guard duty, there must be something incredibly important inside. With that, Kim flashed his claws, opened his mouth wide, and lunged forward, fully intending to bite the soldier's head off. But the man yelped and dodged, leaving Kim with nothing but a mouthful of helmet feather. The soldier stomped on Kim's front leg and thrust his sword right through Kim's mouth. In return, Kim immediately raised his claws and swiped straight for his face. But the man cleverly used his sword to parry the attack. Suddenly, one of Kim's own feet stabbed the soldier in the stomach. It was, of course, his severed leg. The soldier sputtered, "What? How can that severed leg?" Kim's claws squeezed the sword tightly, making it crack under the pressure. Then with a fierce swipe, Kim sent the soldier tumbling with a groan. Ketchup spurted everywhere as Kim began to chow down. All of a sudden, the sanctuary seal appeared on Kim's back, and a loud explosion erupted. The blast tore through the floor, dropping Kim into a tunnel below. He thought, important things are usually hidden in the basement. Then, catching a whiff of something, he added, "There's a smell of corpses, must be this way." And with that, Kim dashed off, following the scent. As Kim raced through the tunnel, a heavy shield slammed down from above. More shields descended, in front of and behind Kim, trapping him completely. Next, water began to pour from holes in the walls. As the water level rose, Kim started to feel a bit flustered. Water well obstacles like this must mean I'm on the right track. By this time, the water was already over Kim's head, and before long, Kim was completely underwater. Meanwhile, in a research lab beneath the cathedral, scientists were observing Kim through their monitoring system. One of them sighed in relief as Kim was submerged. Another watched the screen and remarked, "Here it comes. Since it's a mammal that breathes with its lungs, this should be quite effective." The lead scientist simply replied, "Good. But how did a monster even appear in the city? And why is it targeting this cathedral? What on earth is going on?" Suddenly, the lab wall shattered, and a torrent of water burst through. The scientists were swept away right before the stunned commander's eyes. He could only yell, "What's happening?" Spotting Kim shaking his fur dry in the distance, he cursed. "Seriously, how did it survive?" A moment later, he gasped in shock, "Unbelievable!" Because at that instant, Kim had transformed now, sporting smooth skin and a brand new fishtail, a dorsal fin and gills. The commander stammered, It grew fins and gills. It evolved in such a short amount of time. "Activate Heaven's Punishment now," he screamed. An aide quickly responded, "Yes, sir." A laser sight immediately locked onto Kim's nose. Kim just wondered, what's that little red dot? Before lunging forward and pinning the commander down, making him scream, Kim just bared his sharp teeth and said, "I haven't even bitten you yet." The commander shrieked, "What a monster can talk!" Kim then took a bite, which effectively muffled the rest of his sentence. He screamed, "R, Heaven's Punishment, hurry!" An automated system voice then echoed, "Level 1 researcher has requested activation of Heaven's Punishment. Position confirmed. Target identified." All the while, the commander's scream served as a nice, chaotic soundtrack. The system announced, "Safety range disabled. Press the button to execute command." And a scientist promptly slammed the button. A brilliant light flashed in the sky above the holy sanctuary. A massive pillar of light pierced through the ceiling from above, striking Kim directly. The intense yellow light seemed to incinerate Kim on the spot. He felt like he was being melted and calmly thought, a super high temperature device activated by coordinate identification. So this is what they call Heaven's Punishment. When the pillar of light finally receded, only a small piece of a tail was left on the ground. As for Kim, he had been melted into a gooey puddle. Suddenly, the scientist at the console received a new message. The Cardinal has requested the activation of Heaven's Punishment. The man grumbled, "Again, what the hell is going on?" Completely failing to notice the puddle of Kim stirring behind him. The scientist at the console was completely focused on his task. The system reported again, "Position confirmed, target identified, safety range disabled." A charred but fully reformed Kim was now standing right behind him. The system announced, "Press the button to execute command." The scientist reached out his finger, but before he could press it, a whole lot of ketchup gushed out. Over in the ceremonial hall, the Cardinal was aiming a laser at High Panic's chest. He gritted his teeth, thinking, what in the world are they doing? Why is it taking so long? His eyes were still glowing, the laser beam steady. The beam was still aimed squarely at High Panic's chest. He fumed, "Why hasn't anything happened yet, even though this demon has caused so much destruction? Why haven't they activated Heaven's Punishment?" With a sigh of frustration, he finally had no choice but to retract the laser beam. Just then, High Panic called out, "Cardinal Nguyen, you've been rather quiet for a while. Is something the matter? If not, we will proceed with the wedding." "What do you say?" He offered a sinister smile. The Cardinal could only force a dry laugh. "Ha ha, of course we can." Later, H-Pick was in his room, clutching his stomach and roaring with laughter. "Ha ha ha, that foolish Cardinal's expression was absolutely priceless, huh?" In the end, he couldn't get another word in. The punishment was set to happen at the wedding, or an unknown monster was scheduled to appear at the main cathedral. He said to Kim, who sat across from him, if he had just tried to issue the punishment order, he would have never understood why Heaven's Punishment failed to activate, and of course they would never suspect that the monster was you, huh? So what is this Heaven's Punishment anyway? I'm a little curious about that system. Kim replied, "It's an advanced scientific device. As for its power, if I wasn't afraid of exposing my identity by dropping my disguise and using my dragon skin, it wouldn't have much of an effect on me." He recalled the time he was disintegrated by a pillar of light. HPIC noted, "A scientific device, you say? So that's why we couldn't find any traces of magic was during our investigation." Kim thought for a moment before saying, "Based on the researchers' memories, the first pope was someone from another world. This technology is from that world." "Made a small mistake on the job. It was unavoidable, but I thought I should let you know." HPIC asked, "A mistake? What is it?" Suddenly a loud voice called from outside, "O Lord Protector of the Jiangxintine Kingdom." The two exchanged a glance, both thinking, that voice? At that very moment, in front of the palace, a group led by the Cardinal was shouting, "O Lord Protector of the Jiangxintine Kingdom, please attend the religious trial at the Inquisition Hall." And so, Kim found himself standing before the Inquisition Council. He was shirtless, revealing the mark of the Holy See on his back. He thought to himself, so this is how it all goes down, huh? He recalled what Jonan had once said, "I don't mean you any harm, but if you kill us, the Holy See will know instantly." He also remembered devouring the soldier at the Holy See and how its seal had appeared on his back. Kim thought, the Holy See will know. She must have been referring to a tracking spell that's cast on you if you kill one of their knights. I did my best to leave no trace, but as I suspected, this was inevitable after fighting one of their knights. He remembered the battle with the knight in the Holy See. The cardinal slammed his fist on the table. He shot up and declared, "Protector of Genshintyne, all are equal in the eyes of the goddess. Whatever your reasons, turning a holy night to gold is an act of blasphemy. Don't. Think for a second that divine judgment will be any different simply because you are a non-believer." As he spoke, he shot a look at H-Beak, who was seated, and added, "Even if you are the king's protector, H-Pick thought he seems to have been bottling up this anger ever since I embarrassed him at my wedding, huh?" He then asked, "Cardinal, did you not just say that all are equal under the eyes of the goddess, correct?" The cardinal replied, "That is correct, Your Majesty. I mean, advisor." HPIC propped his chin on his hand and mused, in that case, does that also apply to someone from a world that the goddess did not create?" he asked in front of everyone in the room. The cardinal froze for 5 seconds. The room erupted in whispers. What a world the goddess didn't create. What does that even mean? The cardinal thought frantically, this is preposterous, absurd. Why would he say that? What does he know? How could he possibly know? The Holy See's greatest secret. All the while H-Pick was just smiling at him. This was information that could deal a devastating blow to the Holy See. Other worlds were merely a rumor in the kingdom. The common belief was that the goddess created two worlds together. In the world that the goddess created, this truth was not yet known. But if everyone were to learn the truth about the magnificent Holy See and its masters, along with the true origin of the first pope, then in alone where the church of the goddess is, the one and only religion, chaos, would erupt. The faith of priests and believers would begin to shatter. The magnificent and glorious Holy See would be shaken to its core, and groups of religious skeptics would rise up. They would smash the crests of the Holy See. The divine punishment sent down by the goddess might just be power from another world, and that was the absolute truth. In the middle of the trial, the cardinal slammed the table and screamed, "What is this nonsense?" Sweat poured down his contorted face as he said, "Another world, do you have any proof of that? How dare you speak such blasphemy in this sacred religious trial? Heavens, such blasphemy. Blasphemy against the goddess." Afterwards, the trial was postponed due to the cardinal's emotional outburst, and the newspapers were delivered to the city's residents. The headlines reported the shocking news the king had revealed, which had left the cardinal completely bewildered. The entire courtroom had been thrown into an uproar over it. Suspicions began to surface. Do other worlds really exist? The public was in turmoil, buzzing with talk. Another world. Once Elm shared the possibility that other worlds exist, the goddess's authority began to fracture. Believers were divided. There were the common folk, the priestly factions, the pro-otherworld group followers of other sects, and the cardinal's factions were all at odds, and the main anti-otherworld group began making its move. The public was whipped into a frenzy, and at a time when no one knew who to trust, the conflict between the supporters and the opposition had gotten way out of hand. In the end, a civil war broke out. They attacked the Holy Temple, and that day it was consumed by a sea of flames. That was the long and short of it. Holding a newspaper showing the burning Holy Temple, Hippik smiled, saying everything was going according to plan. The division was engineered through media manipulation and mind-controlling parasites. He tore the newspaper. Hippik said, "This is how the Holy Temple will crumble from within." At the Holy Temple, the exterior was still magnificent, with a grand statue of the goddess spreading her wings wide. Inside, the Great Hall people were arguing loudly. "What do we do? Most of our followers have already joined the pro-otherworld faction. We were only able to keep a few nobles on our side because they get funding from the Holy Temple. But now, even those nobles have suddenly vanished. This is definitely not a coincidence." The current pope of the goddess's Holy Temple listened with a grim expression. He said, "This is without a doubt the work of the Girgensenten Empire. At this rate, things will get extremely dangerous, but there is still a solution." A cardinal asked, "Do you have a plan, Your Holiness? If so, we must act swiftly before it's too late." "What is the plan?" The pope gritted his teeth and said, "We will assassinate the king." The declaration left the other cardinals stunned. Suddenly, someone stepped forward. A girl in a hood led the way, and behind her were 4 soldiers. The pope continued, "We will send our most elite team to ensure its success." A few days later in the kingdom of Girgensenten, a cloaked person approached the gate of the royal palace. The guards yelled, "Halt! Who are you?" They pointed their weapons at the person and demanded, "Show your face and state your identity at once." The girl slowly raised her hand. With a single fluid wave, she instantly and effortlessly decapitated the 2 soldiers. A guard from up above yelled, "What are you doing?" But he too was then taken out. The female leader ordered, "Let's go." Together with the 4 other assassins, she stormed inside. Wherever they went, the soldiers were left headless. Suddenly, a hand grabbed one of the assassins by the leg, stopping him in his tracks. He turned back and gasped. They've been beheaded, but they're still alive. And in the next moment, he was struck down. The female leader turned her head. letting out a sharp gasp. She saw a headless soldier standing there holding his own head in one hand and in the other her fallen comrade. The soldier calmly reattached his head to his neck. As the three other assassins charged at him, he unleashed a single attack, instantly sending all three of them to their graves as blood splattered across the female leader's face. She saw that all her comrades had been defeated. At this moment, her hood fell away. It was N. The soldier's helmet gradually vanished, revealing Kim, his body drenched in blood. Kim smiled and said, "Long time no see. You've gotten much stronger since we last met. I suppose you've eaten some interesting things, haven't you?" The assassin leader clenched her fists and seethed, "Duke Protector." She gritted her teeth. "No, you are just a mortal, the enemy of the Modern." Kim just said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Ener shouted, "Don't tell me you've forgotten me. You're the one who killed him." Kim replied, "No, that's not what I'm talking about. Why do you let the prejudices of others make you hate me?" Ener's expression grew ice cold at his words. She shot back, "What do you mean I am Saintess Anna from the Holy Temple?" Kim replied, "That's just what you want to believe." Hearing this, Ener scowled. Her hair, eyes, and eyebrows began to shift. The very ground seemed to vibrate. She smirked. She had now transformed into Zeon Hen. She laughed and asked, "How does a bastard like you know that?" Kim replied, "The goddess is the Holy Temple's ultimate fighting force. There's no way the Holy Temple would allow a child to use such a powerful weapon for personal revenge." Kim recalled Zeon's fighting style. "Just now you were only trying to copy her appearance. Your ability doesn't let you completely become someone else." Zeon Hen retorted, "Here's my advice to you as your former disciple and one of your kind, surrender." Kim replied, "That's quite bold of you. Do you think the two of you together can defeat me?" Zeon Hen said, "No. I'm merely a diversion. The Templar Knights should have reached the king by now." She stood before the palace and laughed. "Without you there, do you really think those soldiers can protect the king?" Inside the palace at the throne, a room of figures sat on the throne as four shadowy figures emerged. All four with swords in hand moved in. One of them declared, "This is the will of the goddess." With that, they plunged their swords into the person on the throne. Blood pooled on the floor. Outside, Kim said coolly, "It seems you don't understand him at all. He may not be strong, but it's not by chance that he's still alive to this day. If the Holy Temple really wanted his head, they should have sent you." Kim smiled and gestured toward Zeon Hen. Two blood-red moons began to glow above his head. Back in the throne room, the assassins were inspecting the body on the throne, but the lead assassin's face contorted. This isn't the Emperor." He realized the person on the throne wasn't a panic. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind them. "I can't believe you had the nerve to trespass in my domain. I don't know if you're brave or just foolish." A panic stepped forward, a magic circle glowing right behind him. He stomped his foot, and the circle flared to life. "Trap," the assassin cried out. "It's a trap." In that instant, countless beams of light rained down around the four of them. The assassin yelled, "Retreat," but the laser beams had already flooded the hall, filling the air with screams. Hapanik laughed and said, "Did you really think I'd be so easy to kill without Lord Kim by my side? Is that right?" Outside, Zeon Hen broke into a cold sweat, thinking, "Holy Maiden, the mission has failed." Kim remarked, "You don't look so good. It seems my prediction was correct. Now what will you do?" Zeon Hen bit her lip. While Kim was still speaking, with a sudden whoosh, she dashed right at him. Zeon Hen sped right past him. Kim watched her retreating figure and mused, "Running away, are we..." Meanwhile, inside the palace, a panic stood over the several charred, smoking corpses. The very next day, the newspapers ran a breaking story. The emperor of the Jijian Continent Empire had been assassinated. This was a conspiracy by the anti-Otherworld faction targeting those who were pro-Otherworld. The emperor's assassination in the middle of the night posed a serious threat to the safety of the empire's citizens. People reacted to the news in shock, saying, "This is insane, the world is ending." After learning that the culprit was the Holy Temple, public surprise quickly turned to outrage. The assassins hadn't just targeted the emperor, but also the priests from the pro-Otherworld faction who were under protection inside the palace. With the Holy Temple and the emperor in fierce opposition, the people began to attack members of the Holy Temple. The outrage grew even greater, and even though the story was a blatant lie, the people were furious with the pontiff over the incident. The Holy Temple, with its anti-Otherworld stance, could no longer hold the trust of its followers. The media began to steer public opinion exactly according to the emperor's plan. Enraged citizens with veins popping and faces distorted with anger spoke out. There's no way the assassination of priests could be the will of the goddess. The anti-Otherworld faction and the Holy Temple are heretics. At the palace gates, a large crowd had gathered, seething with anger. The Jijian Continent Kingdom had officially declared them heretics. Shepanik took the lead, inciting the crowd and declaring war on the heretics of the Holy Temple. Elsewhere, the Pope roared, "What the hell had happened? The assassination failed, and we've lost our knights. We even handed that bastard king a pretext to wage war." He angrily slammed his hand on the throne and turned to the two people before him. We invested so much effort into creating the Holy Maiden. So what is this shameful result? I'm talking to you, the paladin of the Holy Temple and the senior manager of the Holy Maiden Creation Project, Giumento. A young, short-haired man with glasses stepped forward. I accept full responsibility. The Pope scolded, you had one job and that was to kill that pretender king, but what happened? You failed and ran away. Mento replied, if we had lost the Holy Maiden as well, we would have had no way to deal with them. Dion Hen stood silently beside him. The Pope shouted in frustration, if he's still alive. As he was shouting, bam! Dion Hen's punch sent a chunk of the pillar next to her flying. Shut your mouth, Pope. Mento looked on terrified. Dion Hen gritted her teeth. Instead of wasting time complaining, we should be preparing for war. The Pope listened in stunned silence. Meanwhile, at the border between the Holy Temple and the Jijian Kontan Kingdom, a fierce battle between the two armies was raging. The forces of the Holy Temple attacked with fire magic, while the Jijian Kontan Kingdom's soldiers were heavily equipped with armor and long, sharp swords. A Jijian Kontan soldier shouted, annihilate the followers of the Holy Temple, those who have gone against the goddess's will. But as soon as the words left his mouth, a sword slashed right through his head. His head promptly bid farewell to his body. The paladins had arrived. Seeing this, the Jijian Kontan soldiers began to panic. They fled shouting, retreat, retreat immediately. Watching the soldiers scatter, one of the paladins asked in surprise, they're suddenly withdrawing? Is this some kind of strategy? Indeed it was. As the soldiers fell back, another army approached their steps, thundering as they marched in tight formation. This was the transformed army that Prince of Panic had been hiding deep in the palace basement. Thousands, even tens of thousands of them were advancing. Faced with the Jijian Kontan Kingdom's overwhelming numbers, the Holy Temple lost the battle at the border. A final barrier was raised in the center of the Holy Temple. Not only that, but they also set up a defensive line. Then one day, a lone man was seen slowly approaching the center of the Holy Temple. He was tall and thin, carrying a very large backpack. He was a prisoner from the Jijian Kontan Kingdom. In a flashback, we see Prince Panic visiting him in his cell. Threats, robbery, rape, massacre, theft. Why are you still alive? Someone like you should have been executed to atone for your crimes. The prince glanced at a piece of paper. Ah, is it because you're a member of the royal family? In any case, you are perfectly suited for this job. With that, the prince crumpled the paper and said, listen carefully, you piece of trash. If you weren't royalty, you would have been executed long ago. But if you do well this time, we'll give you a clean slate. Snapping back to the present, the prisoner recalled the prince's words. He placed the backpack on the ground, muttering, I'll just follow my orders. I mean, my future was supposed to be a lifetime rotting in a jail cell, so it's not like I have anything to lose. He reassured himself. Just as soon as I get back to the royal family, every single person who ever talked trash about me is going to get what's coming to them. While saying this, he unzipped his backpack. Inside the pitch black, countless little pairs of eyes were watching. All of a sudden, a swarm of rats and birds scurried out from the backpack. He thought to himself, I just have to do this, huh? What's the point of setting them free? Out of nowhere, a shot was fired toward his leg. Thankfully, he was fast enough to dodge. He glared in the direction of the shot, spotting two figures in the distance. The one with the weapon was Joaquin. What are you gawking at? Get a move on, you fool, he yelled. Left with no choice, the prisoner had to keep. Shuffling forward, muttering under his breath, that jerk picked the wrong guy. When this is done, I'm taking his head. Wiped the sweat from his brow as he crept forward, but the second he stepped 1 foot over the barrier's line, his entire body erupted in flames. In just a few moments, he was nothing but a charred corpse collapsing to the ground. From a safe distance, Prince Panic stood beside Joaquin, watching the whole thing through a pair of binoculars. Wow, he exclaimed, to think they'd hide something that powerful there. That must be the final barrier to the Holy Temple. The ground outside the barrier was scorched black, but just past the line it was completely untouched. The results of their little experiment revealed that it didn't harm small creatures. However, the moment any living thing of a certain mass stepped inside, it would instantly be incinerated. The prince was furious, with no idea how to get past this obstacle. Then an idea struck the Prince Kim. Come to think of it, he mused, I know someone who can change their body mass at will. Shortly after, Kim was summoned to the Gorgon Kingdom's command tent. So, he asked, what's the barrier's range? Prince Panic sketched a circle on a map around the Holy Temple to show Kim the barrier's perimeter. The prince then explained, we've determined this radius after sacrificing a variety of animals and prisoners to it. The prince also added more. Details for Kim. We tried sending birds in too. Sparrows made it through just fine, but the ostriches were instantly fried. Same thing with dogs. Small ones were okay, but bigger breeds were toast. It even applied to monsters. Hearing all this, Kim grew very thoughtful. Prince Panic concluded that large creatures die while small ones live. Kim then asked, does the species make a difference? The prince shook his head. We can't be sure, but it really seems like body mass is the trigger. The weird thing is, our tests show that anything classified as humanoid like humans, or elves gets incinerated, no matter their size. Prince High Panic leaned forward, clasping his hands and asking earnestly, "But what about you? You can become something non-human, and you can alter your mass, can't you? You're the only one who can change both species and mass." The prince then crept up from behind, placing a hand on Kim's shoulder and asking with a wheedling tone, "So what I'm getting at is, would you be willing to help me out? This isn't just for my benefit. You know that, right?" He then walked back to his seat and laid out the plan Kim would transform into a small creature that the barrier won't detect, sneak inside, and do a little recon. "What do you say?" Of course, the prince knew he needed Kim's help, but he couldn't resist asking, "It's a pretty solid plan, don't you think?" Even while thinking to himself, "I'm probably the only one who thinks that." Kim gave a cold shake of his head. "I refuse." Prince High Panic was floored. "Why?" Kim explained, "If I transform into a small creature, my brain shrinks too, which means my intelligence plummets. Besides, if some unknown variable triggers the barrier, I'd be toast before I could even think about changing back. The plan is way too risky." The prince, now out of options, pleaded, "But we don't have another plan." Kim simply stood up and turned to leave. "Find another way. Besides, I recently acquired something big." This new information piqued the prince's curiosity. "Something big? Did someone get a useful new skill?" Kim replied, "No, I mean literally big. And you've seen it before." Prince High Panic was still racking his brain over what this big thing could be. "I've seen it. Could it be..." Just then Kim stepped out of the tent, his eyes crackling with electricity. Then he launched himself into the sky and began to transform. Prince High Panic rushed out right after him, shouting, "Wait, where are you going?" Only to be stopped dead in his tracks by the sight before him. High in the sky, Kim had transformed into a colossal dragon. Its head, alone, was big enough to swallow the prince's entire tent. Kim was now a truly majestic dragon, and with just a single flap of his wings, a powerful gust of wind blew everything away. High Panic's jaw hit the floor. "What in the world is going on?" he thought. Ignoring the prince's bewilderment, Kim soared high into the sky, hovering above the clouds, and fixed his gaze on the palace, his target. Without a moment's hesitation, he dove straight for it. But at that same instant, something shot out from the palace to meet him. It was only then he realized it was a person. A blinding flash of light erupted. 2 swift slashes sliced cleanly through his massive wings, sending him plummeting toward the ground. Even as he fell, he was still in disbelief, thinking, "My wings, why, were cut." He felt his balance give way and let out a scream of pure panic. The one who had sliced his wings was none other than John Hen. She gave him a sly smile, calling him master, as she declared that the battle had officially begun. Rewinding a bit, while Kim was still airborne, a massive cannon barrel from the palace took aim at him. Inside the control room, an operator stared in disbelief, asking, "Are we really doing this?" Just then, Dai Chat chimed in that he understood everyone's desperation, but even he was panicking over this insane plan. That's when Menton, he gloomily considered how even sane people are sometimes forced to do things that are completely baffling and a little bit crazy. However, he also clarified that this was the Saintess's idea from the start, and what they were discussing was literally shooting a person out of a cannon. No longer able to hold back, he shouted eagerly, demanding to know the mission. Seeing his excitement, the boy had no choice but to oblige, so he quickly slammed the fire button. The cannon fueled up, and then it launched. Jean Hen rocketed high into the air, 2 swords in hand. It was her versus Kim, a tiny human against a giant dragon. Without a moment's hesitation, she delivered 2 swift, sharp slashes that sliced right through both of his wings. Using her momentum, she then leaped forward, digging her swords in for leverage and sliding all the way down his back. Now she was just stuck there, dangling from his back as he plummeted uncontrollably. Jean Hen gritted her teeth, clinging desperately to Kim's back to keep from falling to her doom. He knew that if he kept getting roasted like a piece of charcoal without breaking the barrier soon, his regeneration powers wouldn't mean a thing. But what could he do? He was in a free fall, heading straight for the sharp spire of the castle. Sure enough, the spire impaled him like a shish kebab. Jean Hen could finally breathe a sigh of relief, glad she wasn't the one who hit the ground. The swords in her hands slowly vanished into thin air and she landed safely. But then, a few drops of purple blood splattered on her shoulder, setting her clothes on fire. It was Kim's blood, and it fell just like acid rain. The people below saw him dangling from the castle spire and were stunned. They were ecstatic that such a horrible monster was finally finished. They were so busy celebrating they didn't notice his blood was raining down on them. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. That's when the crowd realized his blood was acidic. And as for Kim, well, he wasn't quite dead yet. His eyes were still sharp and full of defiance. He noticed the paladins had arrived and knew if they attacked now, he'd be in for a world of pain. So he forced himself to regenerate as quickly as possible. He was planning to use his dragon's breath skill even with his damaged lungs. And just like that, he unleashed it. An earth-shaking explosion erupted instantly. A massive fireball erupted, engulfing everything. Right after that, a chain of explosions rocked the entire area. The explosions were caused by a chain reaction from combining his dragon's breath skill with his acidic blood. Meanwhile, in the scorched control room, it seemed only one person had survived. Manhattan struggled to his feet, and a wondered how their reinforced defensive walls could have been shattered so easily. He had been so sure that Kim in his dragon form was on the brink of death. He quickly tried to contact Jin-hen to see if she was okay, but all he got was static. He checked the comms device and saw it was working perfectly fine, but she still wasn't answering. He started to worry, wondering if she'd been knocked unconscious. Then his thoughts turned to the great cathedral, which housed their core facilities. It had been burned to a crisp and was likely beyond repair. It hit him then the holy temple had completely fallen. This made him absolutely furious. He realized that even if they managed to finish off the dragon now, it wouldn't matter. Suddenly the ground began to shake. A massive silhouette appeared behind Manhattan. He spun around his face, a mask of disbelief. There, in the blazing firelight, the terrifying figure of Kim in his dragon form emerged from the smoke. The sight completely terrified him. He'd heard reports about the dragon's power, but he never imagined it would be this ridiculously strong. In a panic, he opened a summoning gate and pulled out a gun. It seemed he'd rather take matters into his own hands than be killed by the dragon. He pressed the barrel of the gun to his own head. Trembling, he was just about to pull the trigger when a voice suddenly crackled over the comms. "This is PP-100Y to Command Center. Please respond." The voice made him freeze. He quickly grabbed the comms and asked if Jin-hen was all right. She responded by asking him, "Are you safe too?" She then stated that she already had their next battle plan. Jin-hen got on the line with the command center and requested a response. Manhattan was absolutely stunned to hear from her. Meanwhile, she was reporting that she had evacuated all the survivors she could find. She also wanted an update on his situation in the control room. He still couldn't believe anyone had survived that series of explosions. And on top of that, the one who made it out was her. It gave him a renewed sense of hope the Holy Temple hadn't fallen yet. Still, he knew it would take a very long time to rebuild. After a moment of silence, he spoke up, telling her how glad he was that she was still alive, and letting her know he was still in the control room. Hearing this, she was also relieved, and she quickly gave him his new mission. Manhattan listened intently to Jin-hen's instructions, not missing a single word. He immediately nodded, agreeing to do exactly as she said. Without a second's delay, he went to the control panel and began to change the radius of the protective fire barrier, stepping right into the spot where it would soon appear. Meanwhile, on Kim's end, he had just about finished recovering and could finally move again, but since he'd used up so much of his stored flesh to patch up his stomach, he'd probably need to focus on absorbing more biomass later. Just then, someone appeared right in front of him, and he eyed them with a hint of caution. The one who dared to block his path was none other than Jin-hen. He called her a holy knight, but she quickly corrected him, calling herself a saintess. He brushed her title aside, wanting to know why she was so dead set on getting in his way. She proudly announced she was the saintess of the goddess's church, and that her mission was to protect this place from monsters, just like him. But he pointed out that wasn't his question. What he really wanted to know was why she had the nerve to face him today, when just a little while ago she had run away at the mere sight of him. Did she suddenly think she could win? Without a trace of fear, she admitted she couldn't beat him by herself, but today was different. She wasn't alone. Just then, a strange slime began to cover Jin-hen's face, and soon her hands were coated in a layer of it as well. In no time at all, the slime had morphed into a full suit of armor. Now fully protected, she confidently told Kim that even if this place was completely destroyed, it was at its heart still her goddess's church. The moment he saw what she was wearing, he instantly recognized it as metal slime. All of a sudden, a massive barrier sprang up, trapping both of them. Inside, he was a little surprised, to say the least. He never expected the barrier to activate here, and he also couldn't believe its range had been altered. He immediately pointed out to Jin-hen that with the barrier up, she was trapped in here with him. Of course, he was just putting on a brave face. He knew deep down that if he took any more damage, this body of his would be done for, so he needed to find a way out and fast. It seemed he also knew that she couldn't last long inside the barrier either. But right as he was thinking that, she suddenly lunged at him and plunged her sword right into his dragon foot. This made him wonder if her plan was to just hold him here, but he was also quite baffled as to how she could even move inside the barrier. Then he looked at the slime covering her body and realized it had to be the metal slime. On top of that, it looked like she knew how to negate the barrier's damaging effects. Without a second thought, he coated himself in his own metal slime. Even so, Kim could tell he didn't have nearly enough to cover his whole body. If he were to shrink down, he wouldn't have time to heal from his current injuries. Seeing he also had metal slime, Jin-hen declared that they were finally on an even playing field. Plus, she knew his regeneration had its limits. With a triumphant grin, she announced that this place would be his grave. Fed up. With her talk, he casually swatted her with his tail. The blow was powerful, sending her flying across the room. Kim calmly noted that all he needed to do was analyze the barrier's damage pattern to find a way out. He even smugly added that he could sense another little mouse scurrying around. It seems this mouse was Manhattan, who was watching with worry as Jin-hen was slammed right into the control panel. Looks like her metal slime had worn off, and at the same time, the barrier's control device shattered. She yelled for Manhattan to get out of there, but it was already too late. Kim had appeared before her in an instant. He strolled up and announced that it was all over since he knew her energy was completely drained and she didn't have any metal slime left for protection. He did admit, however, that she was pretty impressive for lasting this long. But now he arrogantly declared that she was no longer in his league, as he changed back. Into his human form, he chuckled sinisterly, telling her it was hopeless. But then she spoke up, saying, "You're right. This is the limit, but it's the limit for both of us." As she said this, her hand reached out and touched the barrier's control panel. A sense of dread washed over him. Something was wrong. And he was right, because she had just reactivated the fire. Barrier. He immediately started to panic as he felt the barrier closing in. He quickly tried to transform. Back into a dragon, but tough luck. Before he could even move, the barrier had clamped down, trapping him completely. This left him a little stunned, realizing he'd been just one step too slow. Meanwhile, John Hen's mind was racing. She knew the barrier system ran on electricity. If she used her metal slime to patch up the broken machinery and get the current flowing again, she could definitely get the barrier working, at least for a little while. A moment later, she looked at him smugly and said she'd warned him. The crazed look on her face was unmistakable as she declared once more this place was his grave. He knew full well that he was in deep trouble, and it was far too late to do anything about it. He could already feel his regeneration failing to keep up with the damage he was taking. What's more, he would soon be overwhelmed by a gnawing hunger and a bone-chilling cold. As it was, his limbs were going numb and his vision was fading to black. All of this left him wondering just what was happening to him. Is this what death feels like? He glanced down to see Jian Hen calmly approaching him. She stood right in front of him and declared his loss. Oddly, he wasn't in any pain. In fact, he simply praised the experience as being absolutely wonderful. Then out of the blue, he said it was time and asked for his reward for the Demon King extermination campaign. This request, combined with a halo of light that popped up out of nowhere, left her totally bewildered. She had no idea what he was talking about or what was even happening. As his body began to fade, Kim suddenly called out to the goddess, asking for his reward for defeating the Demon King. Right after his body erupted in a brilliant golden light, staring into the blinding glow, a baffled John Hen couldn't understand, thinking he was calling her a goddess. She then noticed the machine behind her was sparking with golden light. But when she turned back to look at Kim, she was completely stunned. Her eyes widened as she stared at a bizarre black hole that had opened up right where Kim had been standing. Around the black hole, strange vein-like tendrils wriggled non-stop. Then a terrifying bloodshot red eye snapped open right in the center. Meanwhile, Kim found himself standing in a completely white, empty space. A moment later, the goddess appeared before him once again. She had a cheerful, smiling icon for a face, and informed him that the Demon King subjugation process would continue asking him what he wished for. Hearing this question, he rested his chin on his hand. He remembered what Mantico had said, and it sparked an idea. If the goddess was an eternal being, then anything should be possible. With that in mind, he made a request that he hoped would get him out of this mess. He asked to be sent back to the moment just after the Demon King was defeated. The goddess, still showing that same smiley face icon, accepted his request. She then started channeling a dark energy right into the center of his chest. The black streaks on his back seemed to come alive, crawling out and connecting to that bloodshot eye back in front of John Hen. Suddenly, 2 black tendrils shot out from around the eye, wrapping around John Hen's legs and catching her completely by surprise. Right after that, the eye itself began to expand, rapidly closing the distance. At that moment, Menton, clueless about the situation, happened to wander into the area. The strange purple-black mass from the eye had already spread to where he was. It quickly engulfed the ground he was standing on and just kept expanding. That purple-black mass now looked like a swamp, with hands reaching out to grab his legs as if trying to drag him down into a bottomless pit. Menton, feeling it crawl up to his chest, screamed in terror, calling out for the Holy Maiden. But before he could finish it, covered his mouth and dragged him down, swallowing his outstretched hand last. All this time, John Hen was still standing near the eye, completely unable to believe in that this was her master's true form. As soon as the thought crossed her mind, hundreds, maybe thousands of eyes opened all over the purple-black mass, and all their pupils turned to stare right at her. For anyone with trypophobia, this horrifying sight would have been enough to cause a heart attack. But luckily, John Hen didn't have it, so she just went pale and muttered a curse. Just then, something started to emerge from the center of the purple-black goop. Desperate screams echoed from inside it as something pushed its way out, slowly forming. A familiar-looking purple-black human figure. 2 bloodshot red eyes opened on its face. One half of the body looked like Kim, while the other half was a grotesque purple-black mass covered in countless red eyes. John Hen was absolutely horrified by the sight, wondering what kind of monster he had become. Her face turned pale, and she broke out in a cold sweat, questioning if this was even real. Meanwhile, Kim was also realizing something. He covered his face with his hand as he felt memories slowly starting to surface in his mind. He recalled his first meeting with the goddess, remembered everything he'd experienced back on Earth Cthulhu and all the battles he'd fought against one person after another in different forms. He looked down at his own purple-black hand and smiled with excitement. S rank. This strange new power felt oddly familiar, as if he'd used it countless times before. Then he turned to Jong-hen, his eyes filled with killing intent, and told her it was time for her last words. Seeing this side of Kim Jong-hen, I couldn't believe her ears. But Kim was like a different person now. He licked his lips and asked if she was referring to his hunger. He even offered some twisted advice, saying that if she experienced it enough, she'd eventually build up a resistance to it. Jong-hen looked at him with concern and asked what would happen if she couldn't restrain her instincts. Kim, with ice in his veins, answered as if delivering a final verdict, telling her that she would probably end up just like him. Hearing this, Jong-hen actually laughed. She said she'd rather sleep forever as the holy maiden than live on as a monster. In her final moments as the darkness closed in, Jong-hen thought of the people at the holy temple and begged him not to harm them, but his answer gave her no comfort. Even so, a small glimmer of hope remained in her eyes. She still believed her master could fight it. His response was to open a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and lunge at Jong-hen along with the words, "I'll consider it." Now, for a long time, the holy temple had existed in another world, one with only a single moon. It had been completely cut off from Earth, its very existence hidden. This was because the key to the gateway was split among the leaders of the 4 great races that ruled humanity: the elves, the dwarves, the beastmen, and the dragons. This meant that opening the path was a feat only possible for a conqueror, someone who had defeated all the other races to stand at the top. That other world, whether it meant invading a pope's holy land or turning a continent born from a goddess into a sea of flames. The beliefs of the goddess church were utterly trampled under Kim's many-eyed monster form. He was filled with a murderous aura as he stepped forward. In all honesty, he couldn't care less what happened to this world. His purple-black, many-eyed aura spread with each footstep he took toward the holy temple, finally converging before a cellar door set into the ground. Opening the hatch, Kim walked down the steps. His body was already covered in purple, black, and red eyes, with only his abdomen and half of his face still human. He recognized the glowing red symbol-covered circle as the very altar the Divine Maiden had mentioned. Looking at it, he knew this was his ticket back to Earth. Meanwhile, with his hands in his pockets, a nervous High Panic asked his companion if they were in the right place. Behind him, Joachim was burdened with a pile of things like a refugee, but the bags he was carrying looked very peculiar. While High Panic was wondering where on earth they were, he suddenly noticed someone standing up ahead. Seeing Kim's back, he quickly called out, asking if he had been waiting long. Kim glanced back coldly, chiding High Panic for being late, though. High Panic insisted he had rushed there as fast as he could. Kim then turned to Joachim and told him to get to work. Ignoring Joachim's grumbling, High Panic turned back to Kim to discuss plans for a victory party, but he was immediately shut down. Kim coldly stated that it would benefit High Panic too if they finished this, quickly asking who had time for a celebration. Hearing that High Panic couldn't argue and just urged him to get a move on, mentioning that this whole mess would be easier to resolve if the Duke, protector of Gania, was reported as having died in the battle at the Holy Temple. After, he said that the two stared at each other in a dead, awkward silence. Seeing this, High Panic scratched his head to break the tension before they parted ways, not knowing what else to say. A moment later, High Panic's voice began to echo softly in the Grand Hall. He was reminiscing about when Kim had first found him. He felt a little reluctant to part ways, especially after they had dealt with all the monsters that invaded his home. He pictured the two of them just sitting and talking. Even though he was constantly terrified of being watched by Kim, he still felt sad to see him leave. At that moment, High Panic couldn't continue his sentimental thoughts. Suddenly, Kim's hand clamped onto his shoulder, his face dark and radiating pure killing intent as he told him not to worry. Kim flashed a vicious smile, 2 red eyes appearing on his face, and sneered that he seemed to have misunderstood something. The words and the horrifying sight were too much for High Panic, who turned pale with fear and began to gag. He bit his lip in terror as sweat poured down his face. Behind him, Kim, looking like the Grim Reaper himself, explained to him that humans are very good at adapting, which includes distorting reality and downplaying the good things in their lives. His words also carried a chilling subtext. Just because a wild animal isn't currently attacking doesn't mean it wants to be friends. That was just his own naive assumption. High Panic trembled, glancing back at the person behind him who was now shrouded in a terrifying darkness. Kim's voice continued to echo in his ear. You won't misunderstand so easily when your situation changes a little. So, do you still see me as a friend? After witnessing such a terrifying display, High Panic finally regained his composure and collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily and cursing Kim for being a damn monster. At that tense moment, Joachim finished his preparations and came over to report. Just as he said that nothing was happening, a brilliant light flashed behind them. Startled, they all looked back to see that the pile of items Joachim had brought and placed on the altar was now glowing brightly. The items suddenly erupted into flames, and were quickly burned to ash. Then a strange gust of wind swept across the altar. The glass case around a skull gradually began to crack with glowing green lines. The cracks spread wider and wider, finally coalescing into a swirling green portal. The barrier had been successfully activated. It was time for Kim to leave. Hearing this, a terrified High Panic yelled at him to get lost and never come back. But Kim just smiled cheerfully, gave a little wave, and thanked him for everything. With that, he stepped into the portal. When he emerged, he was standing on dry, barren land. He took a deep breath. This musty scent was definitely the smell of Earth, but the surrounding scenery looked nothing like the home he remembered. To be more precise, Earth had been utterly destroyed. Everything was in ruins without a single trace of life. He turned his head, looking around. He had last been in Central Africa, but the wreckage of the Eiffel Tower was nearby, meaning he was probably in France. He didn't understand why he'd been transported here, but after walking for a while, he remembered a vast forest that bordered Central Africa. Since he came from another world, it made sense. His return point wouldn't be exact. Looking up at the crimson sky and the ruined landscape, he couldn't understand how Earth had ended up like this in just a few years. Suddenly, a UAZ truck rumbled toward him from the distance. Inside the vehicle were two people. Seeing them, he licked his lips in excitement. What better way to get the information he needed? Kim excitedly spread his arms as if welcoming them, but suddenly, with a loud bang, the vehicle was engulfed in flames that erupted from nowhere and blown to smithereens. Staring at the blazing wreckage in front of him, Kim was stunned, bewildered, and deeply disappointed. He looked up and saw the dragon soaring through the air had already torched the car. It then swooped down and landed right on top of the Eiffel Tower. Seeing this unfold, Kim suspected this wasn't Earth. At that same moment, the fire dragon also sensed something. It had caught a familiar scent. The scent of the one who murdered its mother and stabbed it once before. The scent of a cowardly liar. In an instant, it became enraged. Its furious eyes blazed as it roared. It could never forget this scent, the very one it had been searching for all this time. Hearing it speak, Kim recognized the language as Elvish. Then an old memory, from the first time he ate in the other world, flashed through his mind, an image of a mother and child, dragon cuddling. This was the child of that red dragon. He couldn't believe. Yet, how did it get to Earth? Though he was desperate to know the details, the more pressing issue was that this dragon likely had the same abilities as its mother. His own two red eyes reappeared, and his mouth began to water from an insane hunger that only grew more intense upon seeing the dragon. Immediately after, Kim transformed into a gigantic winged dragon-headed monster, soaring up to confront the red dragon on the Eiffel Tower. It seemed that, from now on, he wouldn't have to worry about food on Earth. And that's where my video ends. The content above is a summary of the series. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Don't forget to leave me a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more interesting videos. For now, goodbye, and see you again. Bye-bye. I